Good evening, everyone. I will now call to order the City Council Successor Agencies to Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for March 14th, 2022. Will you all please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, are there any changes to the order of the agenda tonight? Go ahead, Jeff, I see you on first.
Yep, no changes from staff this evening, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I have been advised that some consultants are delayed for a couple of presentations, so I just wanted to advise the public that 8A and 9A might be delayed just a bit while we wait for our guests to join. Do any of my colleagues have any changes to the order of the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to presentations. Tonight, I am very honored to present a proclamation recognizing and commending the Kiwanis Club for 75 years of service to the community. So I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation, and then we are joined by the Kiwanis Club president tonight, and Sandy will be able to say a few words too. So the proclamation reads, whereas the first Kiwanis Club started its service in Detroit, Michigan in 1915. The Kiwanis Club of San Carlos was formed on March 11th, 1947, and has faithfully served local schools and youth for 75 years. And whereas Kiwanis International has grown to be a global organization of over 550,000 members in 80 nations, committed to improving the world, one child and one community at a time. Service is at the heart of every Kiwanis Club, regardless of its location in the world. And whereas in 2005, the Kiwanis Club motto became serving the children of the world to better represent the organization's mission of promoting the development of community leaders, positive role models, intercultural understanding and cooperation, and opportunities for fellowship, personal growth, professional development, and community service. And whereas Kiwanis Club members have unselfishly donated their time and support to numerous community projects, including constructing the Kiwanis building at Burton Park, financing a baseball field at Highlands Park, providing annual sponsorship of children's sports teams and scholarships to high school seniors planning to attend college or trade school, and performing service projects for the Caring Cupboard program, which provides food to low-income residents of San Carlos. And whereas the Kiwanis Club contributes to community engagement by participating in the San Carlos Art and Wine Fair and Hometown Days activities, in addition to devoting their talents to the Kiwanis Show, a biannual community variety program, which has been the club's primary fundraising effort since 1950. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby commend and recognize Kiwanis Club for their 75 years of commitment and dedication to our city, and encourage everyone to enjoy and support this invaluable community resource. So tonight we are joined with Sandy Abrahamson, Kiwanis president. Sandy, would you like to say a few words?
I'd like to say thank you so much for the City of San Carlos to recognize us. We have been a club of women and men for countless years. We have put in volunteer hours to make the City of San Carlos a better place to live. And we plan on continuing this, and maybe I can be here for the 100. We'll never know, but I thank you on behalf of our club.
Thank you, Sandy. I hope we're all here for the 100. I see Councilmember Collins has his hand raised, and then we'll go to Councilmember Palmer-Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and congratulations, Sandy. I was a proud member of the Kiwanis for 15 years in this town, and I know full well how the Kiwanis Club has served our community. I was very proud to have been a part of it, served as president a couple of years, And the rumors are not true. I was not a founding member. So just let's work, as long as we're clear about that. Anyway, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to lend my congratulations to President Abrahamson. Thank you for your leadership, and the Kiwanis International Club is a source of civic pride here in the city of San Carlos. And I'm very much looking forward to the variety show, and hopefully that's going to be back soon so we can all participate and enjoy that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Vac.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sandy, I just want to also offer my congratulations to you and all the Kiwanis members. And it's a wonderful organization. It's one of the great reasons why San Carlos is such a great place to live. So thank you.
Thank you.
I see Councilmember Dugan's hand next.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, Sandy, congratulations. 75 years is a heck of a milestone. And I know Kiwanis does a lot for our community. So thank you for that. And I am glad to hear that Ron was not a founding member 75 years ago. So that's great.
Nor I.
Yes.
Great. Well, I think everyone has chimed in. I will say we're just so appreciative of your service in the community, and it's a real honor to have you here tonight, Sandy. So thank you for joining us and for everything you do in our community.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you again. We will now move on to item 5, council communications and announcements. Do my colleagues have anything to share this evening? A quiet bunch once again. Okay. I have just a couple things to share. I wanted to share that I really enjoyed meeting with various community members out at the farmers market, not this last weekend, but the weekend before. We had a couple staff members out there, and we took some initial comments about the future of Laurel Street, and I really appreciated everyone who came up to the booth and shared their thoughts with us. It was really informative, and I'm really glad that we can be out there again meeting with members of our community. And then I also wanted to just pause for a moment to recognize that we have now marked the 2-year anniversary of the World Health Organization's declaration of COVID-19 as a global pandemic. Here in San Carlos, we had an early glimpse into the pandemic as we hosted the cruise ship passengers who needed to be quarantined in early March. I want to take a moment to thank our frontline workers and our staff, support staff, for getting us through these 2 difficult years. And I want to thank our community for its resilience and its willingness to work together to get through some of the dark days that we experienced over the last 2 years. And I also want to take a moment to extend my heartfelt condolences to those who have lost a loved one over the last 2 years. Okay, with that, we will move on to our next item, which is public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. And the call-in information and Zoom information is on the screen. Crystal, is there anyone waiting to speak under public comment this evening?
Yes, I do see one hand at the moment. Eric Chang, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, good evening, council members. This is Eric and Sam. We are new residents here on the San Carlos, and we live on the San Carlos Avenue. We moved in last October, and we have been really enjoying this beautiful and welcoming, friendly neighborhood. Last Saturday around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a very loud noise from downstairs. So I went down to investigate, and apparently a speeding car first crashed into a BMW parked on the street, and then it went on to crash into my neighbor's tree in the front yard. The whole car then went up in flames. This is 2 a.m. in the morning. Luckily, the ambulance, police, and the fire truck all arrived very on time to help with the situation and put out the flame. But imagine the shock and horror of witnessing this at 2 a.m. in the morning in a very peaceful neighborhood. The car tree and the mangled BMW car are still on the street as a reminder of us of this tragic accident. And from my understanding, while talking to the neighbors, this isn't the first time this happened either. Back in 1991, an innocent little girl was also killed while crossing the street to meet his dad during Halloween. It happens around the same area. There's a long stretch of San Carlos Avenue that has no stop signs. Drivers tend to build up the speed along these stretches, especially from the Alameda to the Club Street. Where many accidents happen, there's a sharp bend around the curve. There's many ways that we can try to mitigate this issue. A stop sign, some speed meter signs, or any sign that alerts the driver there's a curve coming up, and that could help calm the traffic. I understand there is like trade-offs between safety and traffic efficiency, and these can be imperfect measures. But the most recent incident reminds us that if nothing is done, the cost could be human lives next time.
Thank you, Ms. Chang. Ms. Chang, if you want to stay on the line and give your email information to Crystal, or you can follow up with City Council at cityofsancarlos.org. I'll make sure that a staff member follows up with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Crystal, is anyone else in the waiting room?
There are no further hands.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to the consent calendar. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull an item from the consent calendar this evening? Councilmember Dugan?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I don't want to pull anything from the consent calendar, but I just wanted to pause to recognize that we are reappointing, I believe, 6 commissioners for additional 3-year terms on their city commissions. And I just wanted to pause to thank them for their service and just recognize the important contributions of our commissions to the good operation and connection with our community, and that I appreciate their service. And just to point out that our commissions are a great way for anyone who's interested to get more involved with San Carlos.
Thank you. I was going to share the same sentiments this evening to thank our commissioners for their service. They are community volunteers, but I can say that the council does rely on their feedback and guidance quite a bit. So I do appreciate their time and their willingness to serve. Any other items? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through L and item M. Adopting ordinance number 1579, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, repealing San Carlos Municipal Code Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, and adopting a new Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, regulating the use of disposable food serviceware by food facilities to align with new state laws.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell, excuse me.
Old habits die hard, it's okay, yes. Okay, great. We will now move on to reports to council, but I did want to check in with Crystal. Is our speaker available at this time for item 8A?
No, it doesn't appear that he is available. The speaker or consultant for item 9A looks like she has joined us, so we should be okay to move on for that.
Okay, so for the public's benefit, I will take 9A study session, discuss and provide direction to staff on a childcare impact fee for non-residential development. And joining us tonight is Judy Hawk and Ashley Knott. You guys want to take it from here?
Great, thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, and San Carlos community. My name is Judy Hawk, and I'm a senior analyst with the Community Development Department. And I'll kick off the study session presentation on childcare development impact fees for non-residential developments. And I'll hand it over to Ashley, our consultant from Economic and Planning Systems, EPS, who will be doing the bulk of the presentation. As you can see here, pausing. All right. As you can see on the agenda, we'll start off the discussion with highlights on the development fee parameters, talk about the potential ways the city can use the revenues collected, and then we'll end the study session with some recommendations and next steps. Next. Since 2017, childcare has been a priority for City Council and since been added as a strategic goal, specifically focusing on increasing childcare spaces in town by reducing regulatory and financial barriers when it comes to creating and expanding childcare facilities and accessing quality and affordable childcare. Staff has been collaboratively working with the City Council Childcare Subcommittee to evaluate different approaches that effectively and efficiently creates new childcare spaces. And it was determined that a child development impact fee will help us better reach this goal. In response, the draft Nexus study was updated, which Ashley will be talking about soon, and the draft fee parameters were developed. And after we talk a little bit about what actually are development impact fees, we'll go into the different fee recommendations. As we go through the study session, staff is looking for feedback on whether the City Council wants to actually proceed with a development impact fee, and if so, do they agree with the recommendations to only apply it to non-residential developments and also include a build on-site option, which Ashley will also explain during the discussion. I'll hand it over to Ashley, who will dive into the fee parameters now.
Great, thank you, Sajudi. My name is Ashley Canna. I'm a principal with Economic and Planning Systems. And Crystal, if we could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So let's just dive back in. That was great context. So development impact fees, as a group, we've talked about them before. They're authorized by state statute. It's Government Code Section 66,000 for those of you who want a little fun reading at some point. It's also known as the Mitigation Fee Act. These are one-time charges on new development, and they're fees that are calculated according to a nexus logic, is what we say. So that is, the law requires that impact fees be based on a reasonable and proportional relationship between new development, the impacts of new development, and the cost of mitigating those impacts. And the fee revenue can only be used to fund capital projects. It can't be used to fund maintenance or operations. And maybe one of the most important things for this evening is to remember that is one of several tools that we're going to use to help address childcare needs in the city. Next slide, please. So related to that point, we have been thinking about childcare impact fees in this larger context. That is, what other tools, what other programs can we tap into to create a really holistic set of solutions? So moving clockwise from the lower left here, already the city has made updates to the municipal code as described in the staff report, and also decided to waive transportation impact fees for home daycare providers. Childcare can also be in the mix when you think about or negotiate community benefits with developers. Likewise, if a project is subject to a development agreement, the city can propose that childcare improvements or programs be included as part of that negotiation. The city's in the process, I believe, I might need that fact checked for me, of considering general commercial and industrial zoning amendments to allow childcare as a permitted use, if appropriate, in key areas throughout the city. And then city staff has already reached out to the San Mateo County 4Cs and has initiated some preliminary conversations about what a future partnership could look like. And then for some time now, we've been exploring the potential role of a childcare impact fee program. And that's the piece we're really talking about tonight. Next slide, please. So the Nexus study, which was in the packet for this evening, calculates what we call the maximum allowable fees. That is, these are the fees that if you charge them, they would fully mitigate the demand for childcare spaces generated by employees occupying new non-residential developments. These fees, they're on the left here. They range from $3.35 a square foot for hotel and industrial uses to more than $10 a square foot for office and R&D. Retail is there calculated at $5 a square foot. $5.03. The differences in the fees by land use category are really tied to differences in employment density. So that is, office R&D uses generate more employees than the same amount of industrial development, for example. It's one of the underpinning assumptions here. Very often, cities do not charge the maximum allowable fees for a variety of reasons, even though you can. The biggest reason cities may end up adopting lower fees is because there may be concerns about development feasibility. So the goal here is not to stop new development, of course. The goal is really to balance new development by mitigating its impacts. And the next several slides will walk us through some of the ways we've been thinking about the feasibility of these fees. But as a preview, we're showing here the recommended fees on the right. And they're set, as you can see, at approximately 50% of the maximum fees with some rounding. So next slide, thank you. So these next 4 slides, we're going to go land use category by land use category. And what we're showing here are the shaded bars are the maximum calculated fees on the left, and then the reduced fees on the right. And they're set against other cities in the larger Bay Area that also charge childcare impact fees. In almost every case, what you'll see is that the maximum fees would put San Carlos at or higher than the other cities, sometimes much higher, while the recommended reduced fees are a little more moderated and really in the mix when we look at other cities. It may be relevant to note here that the Livermore fee, it's interesting, it's a social and human service facility fee, and revenues from this fee have been used for childcare purposes. So it's tackling a broader set of improvements, but often used for childcare. So here we are, this is the office and R&D land use category. And maybe we could look at the next one, please. Here's our retail prototype. So this is looking on a per square foot basis. Again, what I'm hoping you can see is how the reduced fee compares to the maximum fee, and then where that sets you against some of these other cities in the Bay Area. Next, please. Hotel, similarly at $1.60 a square foot. You're not the head of the pack, somewhere in the middle there. Next, please. And same with industrial. You can see it's consistent in other cities also that the hotel and industrial, just like we calculated in San Carlos, are generating the lowest maximum allowable fees. Next, please. So another lens that we used to evaluate the maximum fees was the aggregate fee burden. Sorry, just 1 second. We looked at your current impact fees, those that apply to non-residential development, and we added them all up. So it's your traffic impact fee, your sewer capacity fee, and your commercial linkage fee. And then we added in the maximum childcare fee and calculated how much that would increase the existing aggregate fee. So for example, just taking office and R&D as an example, the current aggregate fee burden is nearly $30 a square foot. If we add in the maximum allowable childcare fee at approximately $10 a square foot, the overall fee burden would increase by 34%. The aggregate, that same percentage, that aggregate fee increase is reduced to 17% using the recommended reduced fees. That makes some sense, right? Because we set the reduced fees at around 50% of the maximum. I will note here that looking at the aggregate fee increase on industrial appears quite high, 49% for the maximum fee or 23% for the reduced fee, but it's starting from a much lower base amount. So that's the math to keep in mind there. And with this analysis, as with the fee comparison work that we just looked at, there's really no right or wrong answer. It's just different ways of looking at the data. Next, please. It is important to identify how the fee revenue will be used. It's something that city staff has been focused on and the childcare subcommittee as well. We need to think about how we're going to use this fee revenue to increase the number of childcare spaces in the city. And the Mitigation Fee Act is fairly prescriptive in this regard. The revenue can only be used for capital improvements that increase the number of spaces in the city. That's really the foundational underpinning of the Nexus study. So some of the some of the uses, potential uses of fee revenue would be, in partnership with private sector developers or nonprofits, the city can contribute to the development of new childcare facilities located within the city. Land acquisition for new childcare facilities. Land costs are a part of the Nexus study, and so that would be a justifiable use of fee revenue. And loans and grants are also a possibility to the extent that these are offered to small or large family childcare homes or to childcare centers who are seeking to create or expand capacity. So not loans or grants to subsidize the operations or the tuition or payroll or anything like that. But if it's a home improvement to expand the number of kids that they can accommodate, cannot be used to subsidize operations or otherwise provide direct assistance with childcare costs. Next, please. Thanks. Another consideration might be, how effective will this fee program be? Will we ever have enough revenue to do anything meaningful? And this table provides a really quick calculation of how long it might take to collect enough revenue to fund the development of a new 10,000 square foot childcare center. A 10,000 square foot childcare center would accommodate approximately 60 children, which is considered, between 50 and 60 kids is considered an efficient size at which to operate a childcare center. That cost would be nearly $5 million. And assuming about 100,000 square feet of new office and R&D development a year, it would take 5 years to generate enough revenue if the maximum fee is charged, or 10 years if the reduced fee is charged. But it's worth pointing out that the assumption of 100,000 square feet of development each year is highly volatile. There may be some years where there is no new non-residential development, or right now, for example, you have close to 2 million net new square feet of development in your pipeline. And if that development were to materialize evenly within the next 3 years, which is sort of the timeline we might attach to a set of pipeline projects, you would have enough revenue to build a childcare center in 18 months or 2 at the end of 3 years. So putting everything through a lens of 100,000 square feet just allows us to do some math and think about the multiples there. Next, please. Thank you. This slide provides a little bit more information about childcare initiatives in other nearby communities, just as a point of information. Redwood City, for example, provides assistance to individuals and groups interested in starting new childcare programs. They provide assistance to existing programs and to families direct assistance to families looking for childcare, preschool services, placement, that sort of thing. They achieve this because they have hired a full-time childcare coordinator who is housed within the Parks and Recreation and Community Services Department. The city has decided to waive planning fees associated with large family childcare facilities, but they do not have a childcare impact fee program. South San Francisco does have a childcare impact fee program with fees ranging from 18 cents a square foot to 68 cents a square foot of new non-residential development. They also have 3 city-run preschools that are housed in the Parks Division. And in San Mateo, the city partners with the San Mateo County 4Cs to offer support for parents or providers. They also have an impact fee program that charges new non-residential development. Since we put this slide together, it's actually at $1.09 per square foot, a little cost increase. Next slide, please. So the last slide indicated that different cities approach their programs in really different ways. One of the creative ideas we've come up with for San Carlos that we're looking for your input on tonight is that, given the amount and the scale of development in your pipeline, we are thinking about an on-site build alternative. So this is an option that would apply to non-residential development above a certain threshold size, like 50,000 square feet, for example. The idea is that instead of paying the childcare impact fee, the developer could comply with the requirement by building a childcare center on site. So assigning 10% of the overall project square footage, for example, to be used for childcare. That threshold size, I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, it's important because it means that the resulting childcare center would be large enough to actually operate efficiently. And of course, there would be certain requirements that would have to be met. For example, state licensing requirements for the childcare space itself. Is there enough space? Are the plumbing fixtures right for toddlers? All of those types of things. And proof that the space will be operated as a childcare center. Not that the space will be created, but that the space will be operated as a childcare center with the retention of a licensed childcare operator. There may be circumstances in which the developer wants to build a childcare center, but has another site in mind, or maybe their site isn't appropriate for childcare in some way, for some reason. And the city can decide if allowing the center to be provided off-site meets the city's objectives here. So this would not be a requirement for larger developments. It would be an alternative way of complying with the impact fee requirement and could be drafted into the ordinance if there's interest in this approach. Next, please. This is my slide. This is you. I'm handing it back to Judy. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Ashley. So as we mentioned earlier, there are other avenues to help address the childcare shortage issue, including collecting funds through development agreements by identifying childcare as a community benefit. So if mutually agreed upon by the developer and the city, it could be an alternative means of satisfying the childcare fee obligation by having it identified and articulated in a development agreement. The benefit of collecting revenues raised through development agreements is that the city has much more spending flexibility. So as you listen through Ashley's part of the discussion, you may have noticed there's a lot of strings tied to a development impact fee. It's just more strict. In funds collected through development agreements are just more flexible. For instance, the city can use the funds to partner with nonprofits, such as the San Mateo County 4Cs or other regional agencies, to create a childcare program collaboratively to help families or even operators. If the city wanted to, they can use the funds to go towards building new spaces. Unlike funds collected through development impact fees, the funds collected through development agreements could actually be spent on existing in-home and commercial providers for operations through grants and loans. And so although this study session is mainly focusing on the childcare development impact fee parameters, staff wanted to give an idea of other alternatives available to the city. Next. So with that said, if the City Council would like to proceed with implementing a childcare development impact fee program, it's recommended that the fee is only applied to non-residential developments, to adopt the reduced fee that Ashley presented, and to include the build on-site option as well. If the City Council directed staff to move forward, the next step in the process would be to prepare a draft childcare development impact fee ordinance. With that, we conclude our presentation. Ashley and I are here to answer any questions or provide any clarifications, along with Adam Arison, our Economic Development and Housing Manager, and Al Savay, our Community Development Director. And to keep the discussion organized, I'll delegate the questions to the appropriate staff person as we get them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Judy. That was a great presentation. Thanks to Ashley as well. We'll open it up for questions now from my colleagues. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, thank you. That was a nice presentation. And this is, childcare has been a high priority of our city for some time. And it's been a challenging one because it's hard, you know, we haven't developed too many ways to directly impact this issue. And this is, would be a very concrete step. So I'm, you know, very open to understanding this. And I'm glad to see that cumulative stack of fees, you know, they do add up. But what my question is, so, you know, there's really no, there's only a certain amount of room for additional fees and benefits off of commercial projects. And I just want to make sure I understand this. So if someone was developing by right, within our current zoning, then all these fees would apply, and that makes sense. This would be an additional fee and we'd receive these additional amounts. But if it's in the typical context of these larger type developments, they're typically a planned development because they're asking us for certain exceptions from zoning. And then we end up in a community benefit discussion. And I guess I'm trying to, I just want to make sure, like, do we feel like we'll be getting additional funds out of these projects that we wouldn't otherwise be receiving? Or if we allocate this new fee, would that then necessarily reduce the amount of community benefit we'd otherwise be receiving from a project, given the other fees are already being assessed as well?
Sure. So I'll have Ashley weigh into that question, and maybe Al as well. That's.
I think the answer depends a little bit on how the negotiation around community benefits goes. Is this a discussion that's going to be part of a development agreement where both the city and the developer are voluntarily agreeing to negotiate the terms around a development agreement? But I think if you have an impact fee program, those fees they're required to be paid. And so it's through, if there are other ways of, they're required to be paid. If you are in a development agreement scenario though, whether or not you choose to have those fees be something that you're negotiating around, that is up to the city and the developer. I don't think you're getting extra revenue. I think you're using the development impact fees that you're considering right now as a stake in the ground, something to negotiate around.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I would understand it, is we're basically just choosing of all these benefits we might otherwise be negotiating for, a chunk of it is going to be dedicated for childcare. And it probably would reduce other amounts we might be able to negotiate for. So, I'm probably supportive of that, but I just think it's important to understand it's probably not an additional stream of revenue coming off these large projects. It's simply an allocation that we're kind of deciding upon up front. Is that an accurate way to think of it, as more of an allocation than additional fees when we're talking about a large development in a planned development context?
Through the mayor, I think maybe I could take a stab at this one. I don't think it's necessarily that kind of zero-sum game when you're talking about the universe of fees that we collect. We have the fee that you would be setting in this potential ordinance is a fee that all developers would be required to pay. What I think our consultant Ashley was saying is sometimes the developer asks, well, if you give me relief on this, I'll give you some other benefits somewhere else. So sometimes that can happen. But the fee is the stake in the ground that Ashley was talking about, is that's the fee that you have to pay. Does it impact our ability to negotiate other community benefits? Maybe in a case-by-case basis, but it depends on the project that you're seeing and how well we can do negotiating to get the maximum amount of community benefits, which may include some additional daycare benefits or child care benefits. It may include another benefit that you may be negotiating if that was more important to that particular development. Okay.
All right. Thank you. My second question is the on-site option. Are we confident that that's enforceable on a long-term basis? Like if we allow that on-site development, yes, I'm confident they would initially set it up that way, but do we have a way of monitoring and enforcing so that 20 years from now it's still a child care center? And are we confident that if we agree to on-site options that it's going to be child care for on a long-term basis?
Ashley?
Sure, maybe Greg can tag team this one as well. I mean, this is untested in the city of San Carlos, but it strikes me as a very similar, analogous to affordable housing, where you have an inclusionary program and you're going to require that housing be built, that it be deed restricted for some period of time. So I think the art is in how the agreement is crafted. but I'm confident that yes, there is a way to ensure that it remain operated as childcare space for as long as the city decides that is appropriate to negotiate.
Okay, but like Greg, can we deed restrict a use like that? Is it as simple as like BMR housing?
Well, we could not only could we do that by agreement and through that, because that would be an option. That's the benefit of doing it this way, is it's an option that they select. So with that option comes choices that and provisions that we would be able to impose. And also because, as you pointed out earlier, Councilmember Dugan, many of these projects are planned unit development. This space would be could only be used for child care. It couldn't be converted. So that's essentially permanent, even without a deed restriction, unless a future council decides to change that zoning provision.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Those are good questions. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And if you'll indulge me, I have 4 questions. I'll try to be efficient with them if I can. Ashley and Sujit, thanks for the presentation. It was super helpful to see some of the comparisons. Obviously, it was in the agenda, but I guess what I'm struggling with, one as would help me to sort of grasp this, is what the overall development impact fees we have compared to other communities. Because I saw you talk, and I didn't see that you talked about sort of how we compare with other communities around the childcare one and what our overall fee would be. But I don't know, for example, how that compares with South City and their overall development fees, or Redwood City or anything else. So are we pricing ourselves out of the market, and therefore we're not going to get the development come in, so we're defeating the purpose by making it too expensive to come in here, or more expensive, and Redwood City is going to be a more attractive place? I didn't see that comparison. That to me would be helpful in the decision-making process around this. And I don't know if you have that or if I missed it somewhere, but is that something you can respond to? Or we can get that information or some point, that would be helpful.
A great question, Vice Mayor. We for this study session, we kind of looked at the individual fees for the different cities, but we can look at the aggregate fees and how it stacks up against the proposed fees that we're suggesting or recommending for San Carlos. Or Ashley, if you wanted to add something on that.
No, I think that's right. We didn't do it. It can be challenging. It's doable. It can be very challenging to get a good apples to apples comparison. You have to really develop, well, it can be done. We did not do that for this analysis. And I think another, lens to be thinking through is that really what's driving people to or away from San Carlos? The robustness of your development pipeline right now suggests that there's an awful lot of development interest in your city right now.
Okay, and I do agree. Look, right now we do have a lot of interest, but I also am mindful of, if we scale things too high, does that wane away at some point? So thank you. On the 10%, if we were going to give an option to build, do we have flexibility on that 10%? I'm just kind of curious because for example, we have a big, I think that the Alexandria Center is like a 500,000 square foot center. So would we say, okay, if you want to do that, you'd have to build a 50,000 square foot childcare center? That seems sort of excessive to try to get some space if we're requiring it, where if we said, sure, if you build 10,000, we can find some balance and cut your fee or do stuff like that. I guess that's part of a development agreement, but how we'd have to do that to offer that balance. Is that right?
I'll let Ashley respond.
I think that's exactly right. A project of that scale is probably in development agreement land regardless. And so you've got a lot of flexibility to negotiate the specific parameters. What we're really trying to avoid here is a smaller development that opts to take that option, but then ends up with an amount of square footage that they're allocating to childcare that no childcare operator is interested in occupying because they can't operate efficiently.
Okay, so that makes sense. And it sounds like we can use funding for acquisition. And then do we have the flexibility to lease that property then to a private childcare developer, or are we now on the hook for beginning sort of operating and running childcare facilities? What flexibility do we have if we were to do acquisition around that?
I think that really depends on the direction that City Council wants to go, and I think it can go both ways, right, Ashley?
Yeah, Vice Mayor Rack, are you speaking of acquiring land?
Yes, if we're talking about buying land, I just want to understand what our options are from a legal standpoint that we can do with that land for childcare purposes. Can we lease it out to somebody else, or so what are our options essentially from a legal standpoint?
Oh,
So,
chance at that one, actually.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we would have flexibility on how to operate it, in my opinion, because it's very common that cities contract with childcare providers, and then if it's a larger daycare or it's some policy direction that the city wants to go in, it could be that it would be ours, but we certainly wouldn't be locked into having a city-run or operated center. In that case, we'd probably own the facility, similar to what's happening at Burton Park with Arbor Bay, the after-school program that they have there. But the youth center is probably the other model that we have. It's a city facility with the city staff running it. I think it could be one or the other.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my last question is, with regard to the 50%, sort of the proposed fee reduction, does it have to be across the board, or can we pick and choose the amounts based on how we compare to, let's say, the market or what it looks like in other cities? So if we got to a point and said, gosh, now because the way the fee is structured, hotels are not going to want to come here, but everything else is okay. Do we have that flexibility, or is it we just set the 50% and that's across the board?
Ashley?
You have that flexibility. So you may not exceed the maximum allowable fee. The reason we did that cut sort of proportionally across the board is because in the initial calculation, what we've tried to achieve is proportionality with respect to employment density, right? So the idea that office R&D, if you have 10,000 square feet of office R&D, you're generating some number of employees. That same amount of industrial space will generate fewer employees. So right now, what you see in the maximum allowable fees is a proportionality in that regard. And by doing a, approximately 50% cut across the board, we've maintained that proportionality. It is not required so long as you're not exceeding the Nexus allowed maximums.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate all the responses. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We'll turn to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Most of my questions were answered. I really only have one. And I guess maybe it's Ashley that can answer it. Regarding the build on site option, who's doing that? Do we have any examples we can look at where developers of 50,000 square foot developments and greater have actually installed a child care center and are running it?
I can't speak specifically to that threshold, and certainly not in San Carlos. I know that in, as part of preparing for this, we researched development agreements in Redwood City and South San Francisco, where cities and developers are negotiating for childcare to be provided on site. So certainly that is, in fact, one of the, there's a survey that we used as a data point in our Nexus study, where employers across San Mateo County were interviewed to understand how many childcare spaces are being generated from that on-site employment. So it's definitely, there's a lot of non-residential development out there along our 101 corridor where there is on-site childcare provided.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Ron, did you have any other? Okay, we'll move on to Councilmember Lohan. Okay, thank you. Laura, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. So with respect to the building on-site option, I know Council took a report, I think it was last year sometime, with respect to the available land in San Carlos that a commercial daycare center is allowed in, and it was pretty small. And the majority of the development that's coming in is in an area in which currently childcare is not zoned. And with this provision of building on-site option and negotiating that with the developer, can you talk a little bit about how we would reconcile the current limited zones available for commercial childcare and a requirement for a builder to build a childcare center on site, and how we would deal with that, and alternatively, would they also potentially be able to build a facility, somewhere else where there is existing, where it is allowable?
Thank you, Councilman Laura. We are currently, our planning division is looking into the feasibility of childcare facilities and the general commercial industrial zoning areas. And in addition, at the last subcommittee meeting, I believe there was some direction to look at the possibility of childcare facilities in other zoning areas that we haven't assessed yet. And I'll let Ashley kind of weigh in on how the on-site, the build on-site option would impact this assessment.
Sure. So I see this as an option, but if it doesn't work for both the city and the developer, then it won't move forward. So if the development that's occurring is not an appropriate location for childcare, it's really not an option available to that developer, and payment of the fee would be the way that they would comply with that requirement.
And,
I also noticed
so
that.
Judy, if I could, I'm sorry, Ashley. I just wanted to weigh in, Madam Mayor, on the question with regard to how you would reconcile the zoning, because it's all industrial commercial, as the council member mentioned, and what we would be doing with the larger projects where you're negotiating for a development agreement is you'd be changing the zoning to conform to whatever development that would be. And the tool that we've been using is this thing called a planned development permit. And it's basically like an overlay zone where you change the zone to conform to the development project itself. And so you could, it allows the city to have the flexibility to add things like childcare or retail or other uses that are appropriate to whatever development is on the table.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Parmer-Lohan. I had two questions to follow up. I think everybody asked some really great questions tonight. My first question is, and I'm glad this was up, it's regarding the build on-site option. But so Judy, you mentioned that build off-site is also a possibility. So this kind of follows up with Councilmember Parmer-Lohan's comments. Could a developer choose to partner with a child care facility that's looking to expand maybe along El Camino and build offsite? Is that something that we need to call out in this policy, that build offsite would also be acceptable?
I'll have Al answer that question.
So the offsite, though, is part of it, right? So Judy, it allow this, what you're looking at, the intent of what we provided you is to provide maximum flexibility. And so that would be an option for the city council, is to allow that to occur. And so, yes, it's very possible that if for whatever reason it was not appropriate or just not beneficial to everybody, you could say, well, look for an offsite option. And many times these developers, of course, aren't in the business of childcare, so they would need to contract with a childcare provider or look for that. And many of them do that. They will, for their own campuses, they will get in contract with a childcare provider. And so this offsite option would just be moving that off campus and doing it somewhere else in the community. It's a bit more challenging to find property that's appropriate, but if there's enough dollars behind it with some of these larger development agreements, it's certainly possible.
And to add to that, the way we would ensure implementation is through an MOU, whether it's the build on-site or off-site option, depending on the development.
Perfect, thank you. And my second question is, I know that the last child care needs assessment that I believe was done by the county perhaps, that showed that we were short 600 child care spots in San Carlos. Is that going to be updated? Is there an effort underway to, now that it's been about 5 years, is there an effort to update those numbers on the need?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually reached out to Sarah Kinahan. I think she's with the SNC4Cs, and she let us know that there's a plan to update this year because it has been a long time and the numbers have changed dramatically, especially with the impact of the pandemic. So a lot of jurisdictions are very curious. Ashley, during your research, did you find any other updated county assessments? No, yeah.
No, that remains the latest in as far as I know.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'll be interested in that new study. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for further questions. So why don't we go ahead and take public comment at this time. This is for public comment regarding the child care impact fee. You can join us by Zoom or call in. Crystal, is anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, we have 2 hands up at the moment. Sarah Kinahan, you should be able to unmute.
Good evening, Mayor McDowell, City Council members, and City staff. I'm Sarah Kinahan, the coordinator for the San Mateo County Child Care Partnership Council, and also a San Carlos resident. And the Child Care Partnership Council applauds the City of San Carlos for considering a child care development impact fee, as well as the option to build a child care center. And we would strongly support the city implementing both these policies. The analysis you received tonight, as well as the follow-up discussion, has been extremely thoughtful, and San Carlos is really stepping into a leadership role among the cities in San Mateo County in taking a look at these types of policies. I can say there was a question raised about whether developers have chosen to build on-site childcare, and I'm aware of at least 2 developments in Redwood City, one Graystar development and another Sobrado development, where they have in fact, as part of the community benefits, are building on-site childcare. And in terms of the needs assessment, that was another question that was asked. We are in fact updating that, and we expect to have the results of that by the end of June. And I'd be happy to come back and present on our findings if that is of interest to the City Council. So in conclusion, we are supportive of these developments and hope you will move forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is Rosie Jimenez. You should be able to unmute. Rosie? I don't know if you can hear me. You should be able to unmute by clicking on the unmute button. There you go.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello, Rosie.
Yes. What is this? I didn't raise my hands. Was it raised?
Well, your hand was up for providing a public comment on this item. Are you?
Oh, yeah.
Are you interested in providing a public comment?
No. I'm
okay. Okay, thank you. And Rosie, I just saw that you raised your hand again. So I'm gonna remove that again. There are no further hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, so tonight is a study session on this item. We've all asked a lot of good questions, so I'll open it up to discussion and feedback. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I really appreciate that the council has prioritized the creation of childcare in our community. I just wanted to relay a story about a friend of mine who had a newborn and no family members nearby who could serve in a childcare capacity. And when she, went about to identify a potential resource for childcare, what she found is that, the cost associated with it was commensurate with her salary. So she effectively dropped out of the workforce for about 10 years and, was, re-entered later, but in not as a competitive way as she would have been had she been able to stay productive in that workforce. And then fell further behind with respect to being able to put money into retirement and that type of thing. So the impacts of the lack of childcare and the high cost of childcare have far-reaching effects in our community. And that's just one example. I'm sure that there are many other stories with people's struggles once they start a family to be able to properly care for them and also be able to make a living and stay in our community. So I'm very much in support of this initiative, and I would like to also take a look at Vice Mayor Rack's suggestion that we look at, if the best we can, fees in the aggregate, just to get a sense of effectively what the cost is of doing business here in San Carlos. That being said, with our robust pipeline, and I think the common knowledge in our broader community, how important childcare is and a priority that we're placing on it is hopefully that won't deter the development that's on the way. I'd also be open to exploration of the build on-site option with the minimum square footage requirement so that childcare center would be viable. And then I think Madam Mayor had some suggestions too around the option if that particular space or area is not potentially viable, that there could be a potential, build out offsite somewhere else. So if I got that correct. So thank you so much for this fine work, and I look forward to our continued discussions on this very important area.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. We'll go to Councilmember Dugan and then Vice Mayor Rack.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And this is a very good initiative. I'm glad we're pursuing it. Childcare is, it's been a top goal of the city because it is such a pain point. I appreciate Laura's direct example. There's many of those examples in our community, and it is a real challenge for especially our young families here. So this is something very actionable and direct that we can do to help. So I am very supportive. I think we'll be reaffirming childcare as a goal for 2022 later in this very meeting. So this is all very timely. As we look at the amount of fee to assess, I agree with my colleagues. We do need to be mindful of how all these various fees stack up and what that does mean to the incentives of a project. I'm open to it. Whatever we set here, I think we need to be mindful that, this does put us in a leadership position. So, we might need to adjust it over time, either higher or lower, but be willing to go into this as it's a new program and we need to be flexible with it. I would just observe that, as we're benchmarking this, I don't think there is a market for this because only San Mateo and South San Francisco are peer cities in our county. The other examples are rather far afield, like Santa Monica and Livermore. So I don't think that's our market. All of our neighbors seem to be mostly at zero. So we should just be mindful of that as we think of how to set this rate. That being said, I am supportive of doing something, and that recommended 50%. Maybe that is a good place to start. But we should be thoughtful on that as these various fees are stacking up. And then as far as how we use these fees, I would really like us to think through how we can harness the private market to develop these items. So I heard the idea of providing low interest loans to operators. I think that would be a great program use of proceeds, things like that, where we help people in the very near term get more childcare online. What I don't want us to be doing is building up a large fund and 5 or 7 or 10 years later, we finally get a big project done. And I also don't really think, San Carlos should be thinking about entering the childcare business. I think there are a lot of operators that if we helped and accelerated them and facilitated it, that would just be a more efficient use of funds in this program. And then I'm very supportive of we were calling it on-site build option. Maybe that's not even appropriate. I think maybe it's a direct build option. I think as a city, we would be agnostic whether they build it in their development or build it somewhere else. I think it needs to be an owned property if it's on a different site. It can't be something they lease and, maybe 10 years later, it's no longer childcare because it was only a lease. So I think a direct build option is great because again, it's harnessing the private market to get this childcare done. But all that said, I'm glad we're working on this and very supportive.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Vice Mayor Beck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to just thank the subcommittee for all the work on this as well. I appreciate this coming forward. I think I have similar comments to everyone else. As mentioned, I would like to see kind of the balance of fees as best as possible. So we're able to determine kind of what, I think that will just help me kind of figure out where the sweet spot might be for these childcare development fees and sort of where the best way to land is and be able to have the flexibility because it may vary by type of, I know we sort of set the 50%, but it may vary by the type of business that's there as well. So just being mindful of that. And I agree with John. I would like to just make sure we're thinking about this in the most efficient use of funds to get the biggest bang for our buck out of this, not letting things sit for years till we, sort of scrape enough to acquire something if that's not the best approach. Just so we have the flexibility to do that, I think is important. I definitely support the build on site or, sort of the direct build that was mentioned and the flexibility around doing that. So I think this is a good step forward. And I think for me, it's just a matter of sort of finding the right balance of the fee and what we're trying to do. But it's clearly been an issue that's identified as a priority for us and something we need to move forward with. And I appreciate that we're having this discussion. I think it's a good next step.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I see Councilmember Collins' hand.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nothing really concrete to add, except I'm supportive of moving forward, and I agree that we should watch our fee structure and make sure that we don't end up discouraging what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I'll just chime in too. I want to thank Laura for her time as my co-subcommittee member on the Child Care Subcommittee and the staff for working with us as we thought through all of these different options. I too think it's really important to start signaling to developers of future projects that childcare is important to us. And we've done that in a variety of ways, but I'm glad that this is moving forward as well. I think it's very timely. So for me, my gold standard would be to build on site. When my son was a baby, he was in a daycare in the basement of my building at work, and it was really convenient as a parent to be able to visit him on my lunch breaks when he was a tiny baby and be able to go down there when he was sick. So I think that that's number one. Then number two is to partner and build off-site. And then number three is to put fees into a fund. And I too support my colleagues' suggestions that I prefer that the funds be thought of as kind of an accelerator fund to come in and go out quickly and to not sit there and languish in a bank account for 5 or 10 years. I'd want to see those funds put to work in a very expeditious way. And I want to say I appreciated Sarah Kinahan calling in tonight. I would love to invite her back later this summer to present findings of the childcare study. I think it's really important that we know what our current numbers are in the realm of need with the needs assessment. So thank you everyone for your work. And so Judy, is there anything else that you would like from council tonight in this study session?
I think that was really great feedback. What I'm hearing is that generally City Council is in favor of a development impact fee, but it's I think you guys need some more research on what other cities are doing in terms of the aggregate. So we will look into some of the follow-up items and bring this back to the subcommittee and go from there. Al, Ashley, Adam, is there anything else we needed? Great, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. I'm very appreciative of the study session tonight. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Crystal for her guidance because we skipped over 8A because the consultant was not with us. Should we go back to 8A now, Crystal?
We can. I do see that our consultant is with us and appears to be ready.
Okay, perfect. So we will go back to reports to Council. 8A, receive a report on the results of the 2022 Community Characteristics Survey. Tonight joining us is Dr. Timothy McClarney, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good evening. Before Dr. McClarney starts, I just wanted to give an introduction, please. We're introducing Dr. McClarney this evening to present the findings of the 2022 Community Characteristics Survey. And as some background, the city conducts the survey, a community survey every year. And there are two types of surveys and they occur on alternating years. And the benefit of having these surveys is that it gives our council and our staff a sense of the community's needs and priorities. And that in turn goes and informs our strategic agenda and gives us a sense of the types of projects and initiatives that we want to pursue. There are two types of community surveys that we do as a city. And as I mentioned, they alternate. And the first type is the community opinion survey. And that was done last year. And that's more of a performance measurement tool. It asks the residents to sort of rate us on how we're doing and if we're meeting their expectations or not. And then there's the second type of survey, which is the subject of what we're looking at this evening. And that is the community characteristics survey, which last occurred in 2019. And that will give us some sense of the community's areas of focus and priority and lifestyle and values. So yes, I will introduce Dr. Timothy McClarney of True North Research. You have met him before. He's given presentations before. And True North is the consultant that designs and conducts these surveys on the city's behalf. I just want to mention that there's been a slight change in the presentation since you've seen it earlier this afternoon. And we've updated slides 17 and 18 related to recreation. But I will now turn it over to Dr. McClarney and he will walk us through his methodology and findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall, and good evening, Mayor and members of Council. I'm Tim McClarney with True North Research, and I am pleased to be here this evening. Tonight, we have a presentation which covers the highlights of the survey findings. There is a more detailed full report available, and so tonight's PowerPoint doesn't cover every graphic that's in the report. We're kind of hop, skip, and jumping over the survey and grabbing what we think are some of the more interesting findings. As I go through tonight's presentation, I welcome questions from Council as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. And so with that, if we can go to the next slide. Great. Now did a really good job of kind of covering the purpose of the study and distinguishing this survey, which really focuses on understanding more about your residents' demographics and lifestyles and activities and engagement in the community, as opposed to the citizen survey that we do in the other years that focuses on really how they view the city's performance and providing services. The one thing I will point out, though, is although it wasn't intended to be so, the 2019 survey for community characteristics wound up being a very interesting benchmark. Why? Because shortly after that survey was conducted, the pandemic struck, right? And it changed the way a lot of people live, work, and play in San Carlos. And so we have this very interesting baseline study in 2019 and you know, from which to compare some of the things that have happened in 2022. And so as I go through this presentation, I'm going to be making some comments about how some of the findings we're seeing in 2022 are significantly different than what we found just 2 years ago because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So in terms of the methodology or how we conducted the study, survey was conducted in January of this year, and we started out with a stratified random sample of San Carlos households that we then recruited to participate in the study using a combination of email, text, and telephone, and giving them the option to participate either online at a password-protected website or via telephone, whichever was their preference. We had set out, I believe, to do at least 600 interviews. We wound up walking back in the door with almost 800 interviews, 791 interviews, which is great. No extra charge for the extra interviews. It just shows that you have a community that was interested in weighing in and sharing their opinions on these topics. Now, because this was a random sample of 791 and not a census of all of your adult residents, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. And in this case, that's about 3.2%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results I'll share with you tonight are within 3.2% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your adult residents. I will also mention that the profile of our sample matches the demographic profile of adult residents in the community based on the latest census data. So go ahead, next slide, please. So on to the results. This first slide shows the results of a question where we ask folks to tell us what they like best about living in San Carlos. This is an open-ended question, meaning that we don't present to them that list of issues you see, the items that you see there on the left side of that graphic. We simply let them tell us in their own words what they like best about San Carlos, and then we go back in and review those verbatim responses and group them into the categories that you see here. You can see that in 2022, top response was a small town feel of San Carlos. About 23% mentioned that. An additional 22% mentioned that it's a nice community. They commented on the neighborly aspect of San Carlos. And then the third option here was 19% mentioned something about the downtown area that they like. And then the fourth being the walkability, right? That everything within the community is within walking distance. When you compare the results for 2022 to 2019, the first two categories there were the first two categories then. That means the small town feel and the nice community and neighborly community. But the downtown area is actually new to the top 5 for 2022. So that was a change. Next slide, please. So following up that question where we'd ask them what they like most about San Carlos, we also asked them what would they most like to change about San Carlos. Here again, an open-ended question, so they could tell us in their own words. We went back and reviewed the verbatim responses and grouped them into the categories you see here. So in 2022, limited growth and development was the #1 response at about 18% mentioning that. Right below that, providing more affordable housing, 12%. About 10% weren't sure, nothing really came to mind that they would like to change about the community. And then providing a greater variety of restaurants and stores at 9% rounded out the top 4. When you compare these results to 2019, limited growth and development was the #1 issue then as well as now. But new to this list in 2022 was the desire for more affordable housing, #2 there. That wasn't in the top 5 2 years ago, as well as the desire for more restaurants and stores, which is #3 here on this list. That was not in the top 5 last cycle either. Next slide, please. So after those kind of open-ended questions, we start to drill down and ask folks a series of questions so we can get a better idea of who they are and how they operate and what their intentions are for the future of the city. And so the first question in this series was a simple one. We asked them whether they expect to be living in San Carlos 10 years from now. And as you can see in 2019, about 53% anticipated living in the city, 19% did not, and the rest were unsure. In 2022, we still have about the same amount of folks saying that they anticipate living in San Carlos 10 years from now at 51%. We have, though, a statistically significant reduction in the percentage who said they do not anticipate living in San Carlos 10 years from now. And that group, for the most part, flowed to the not sure category, as you can see there. Next slide, please. For those who owned a home in San Carlos, we also asked them whether in the next 5 years they plan to build an accessory dwelling unit, also known as a granny flat. on their property in San Carlos. You can see in 2022, that number that said yes to this ticked up slightly. It was 6.3% in 2019. It's now up to 8.3% in 2022. And the percentage who said that they plan not to build an ADU in the next 5 years, that also shrunk significantly from 82% down to 75%. Next slide. For those who had planned to build an ADU, one of the new questions we asked this cycle was whether they planned to rent the accessory dwelling unit for supplemental income. You can see that those respondents are sort of broken evenly between about a third who do plan to rent the ADU, a little more than a third who do not plan to rent the ADU, and then about 31% who said that they were unsure. Next slide. So shifting gears a little bit, we asked individuals to tell us how engaged and connected they feel to your San Carlos community. Would they say they feel very, somewhat, slightly, or not at all engaged and connected? Here is an area where we're starting to now see the impacts of the pandemic. You can see that the percentage of residents who said that they felt either very engaged or somewhat engaged declined between 2019 and 2022. And the percentage who said that they feel just slightly engaged or connected increased significantly. Not shown on this slide is another question, not shown in this slideshow, was a question where we asked folks, whether they, how well they know their neighbors. That was another one that where we saw, in addition to the level of engagement going down, the percentage of folks who said that they know all or most of their neighbors also declined between 2019 and 2022, which kind of makes sense when you think about all the isolation and social distancing and restrictions on groups gathering during the pandemic. Next slide, please. That said, we did find, though, that there was no change in the percentage of respondents who said that they currently participate in or belong to an organized community group in San Carlos. It was about 30% in 2019. It was 29% in 2022. Next slide. So shifting gears again into the topic of employment, we asked respondents to describe their employment status both in 2019 and 2022. Interestingly enough, among our survey participants, the employment rate overall was higher in 2022 than it was in 2019. You've got about 70% of the individuals we spoke with who said that they are employed, compared to about 65% pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. In terms of the occupations, you can see that you have a lot of what we call professional specialty employees living in the community, not IT. And what these are individuals who are like accountants or lawyers, engineers, scientists, et cetera. They constitute a little more than 1 out of 4 employees would group into that occupation. About 11% describe their positions as executive positions, 9% in information technology, and then 8% in supervisors and managers. Perhaps more striking is the next slide, where we asked, what industry do you work in? And you can see here that IT manufacturing services is a big sort of employment sector for San Carlos residents. We had 30% of the respondents say that they work in IT and manufacturing services. So that's computer software, manufacturing and services, followed by education at 10%. About 8% are employed in business services and on down. Next slide, please. So here is an area in terms of days working from home. As you might imagine, that we've seen a lot of change in San Carlos in the past 2 years. In 2019, just 13% of the residents or employed residents indicated that they worked exclusively from home. By 2022, that had tripled essentially to 47%. And you can see that currently about 75% of the individuals who are employed and residents of San Carlos indicated that they work from home at least 1 day per week. So massive change in the space of 2 years. Next slide, please. We do nevertheless see, though, that only about 7% of these individuals actually own a home-based business. And so it isn't that they're predominantly operating their own business from home, it's that they're working remotely for another employer. Next slide, please. So We also looked a bit at mobility within the city, and we asked individuals to what frequency they use each of the modes. You see down there on the left side of that slide when they're traveling within San Carlos. And you can see at the top of the list, you got about 85% who say that they use a personal vehicle weekly for making trips within San Carlos. 39% walk from a home to a local store or restaurant at least once per week. And then some of the other modes you can see are used less frequently. When you compare these results to 2019, what we see is that active transportation, so walking and biking, is up significantly. Walking is up 8%, biking is up 5% on a weekly basis from where we were in 2019. Meanwhile, use of Uber and Lyft and use of a personal vehicle are both down compared to 2019. Next slide, please. So we asked individuals also some questions about their health and lifestyle. And so we asked them, thinking about the adult members of their household, what recreation activities do the adults in your household engage in most often? The results you see here on the slide, predominantly walking, jogging, running, about 47%, hiking and nature walks, 33%, cycling at 21%, and then exercising, going to the gym and yoga, about 15%. We have generally seen that some of the outdoor activities are up and some of the indoor things like going to the gym are down for the obvious reasons associated with the pandemic. Next slide, please. And we also asked respondents, thinking of the children and teenagers in their home, what recreation activities do they engage in most often? And you can see a little over half said they don't have children or teens in the home, and that obviously shrinks a lot of the other percentages because this is in terms of all respondents, not just parents. But the activities that their children or teens engage in most often were soccer, cycling, walking, jogging, running, going to the parks or beaches, and then hiking and nature walks. Next slide, please. So moving on to another topic, we want to get a sense for the extent to which residents are either hiring services or doing things that would involve bringing trips to their household. And so we asked them both whether they use a house cleaning service or a maid, that's on the left side of that figure, as well as do they use a landscape maintenance service or gardener, and that's on the right side. And you can see that a little over half of San Carlos residents indicated that they use a gardener or a landscaping service. 47% use a house cleaning service. Both of these are up slightly from where they were in 2019. Next slide. And here is one where we see another pretty dramatic difference between 2019. And we asked, this is the 2022 results in front of you. We asked them how often they have goods packages delivered to their home from Amazon or a similar online retailer, as well as how often they have food, meals, or groceries delivered to their home. And you can see here that in 2022, we had 65% of respondents say that they do this at least once per week in terms of having goods delivered. And you've got about 30% who also have food, meals, or groceries delivered to their home at least once per week. This is a big change from 2019. The percentage of folks who are having goods and packages delivered is up 20% from where it was in 2019. And food deliveries are up 14%. Next slide, please. And then we got to had the opportunity to ask them how often they engage in each of the activities you see there in a typical day, how many minutes, and using the internet and not including social media, right? You had residents tell us that they spend on average 223 minutes a day doing that. You got about 2 hours worth of watching TV and then consuming news about an hour and 13 minutes and on down. Another really big change in this topic compared to 2019, the number of minutes devoted to using the internet, not including social media, is up 81 minutes compared to what it was in 2019 on average. I think that's a reflection in part of all the remote work, right? If you're working in an office, you're probably spending a little less time on the internet than if you're working at home and having to connect in meetings that way. So it's up 81 minutes per day compared to 2019. Next slide. So, as I've been going through this, we've been noting that there's been some pretty big changes associated with the pandemic in terms of the, San Carlos residents' activities and outlooks. But we did in 2022 also kind of tackle this question directly. We asked them currently, would they say that the pandemic is having a big impact, moderate impact, small impact, or no impact on their household? 32% indicated it was a big impact. An additional 47% said that the pandemic is currently having a moderate impact on their household. Next slide, please. And we went on to ask them what they would say is the main impact that the pandemic is having on their household currently. This was an open-ended question, so they could tell us anything that came to mind, and we here again reviewed the verbatim response and grouped them into the categories you see here. And so the biggest sort of impact that San Carlos residents said the pandemic is having is their inability to socialize and gather with friends and family. About a third mentioned that. 14% mentioned the isolation of the pandemic and having to stay at home. 14% mentioned the need to work from home is a big impact on their lives. And then you can see the next three items have to do with restrictions on either travel or the ability to go out for entertainment and dining, as well as just reducing the activities they engage in general. Next slide, please. So quick wrap up, again, many more details in the full report, but I think the obvious takeaway from this study is that, it was a very, again, not intended as such, but it wound up being a very interesting comparison between the 2019 results right before the pandemic struck, and now in 2022, we're into our third year of the pandemic, in terms of what impacts these have had, the pandemic has had in terms of San Carlos residents. Probably the most obvious ones have to do with working and work-related activities. The percentage of residents working exclusively from home have tripled. You have nearly half of your employed residents working from home full-time, and about 3/4 of which are working from home at least one day per week. As a consequence, and again, I didn't share a few of these slides, but I'm summing this up in the conclusions. Commute distances that San Carlos residents are traveling declined, as well as commute durations declined. Use of transit, rideshare, and a personal vehicle have all declined. And one of, I think, the silver linings of the pandemic is we have seen that active transportation is increased. So more people are walking, more people are biking than they were prior to the pandemic. We did see the pandemic has kind of had a diminishing effect on residents' sense of community in San Carlos. They don't know their neighbors as well as they otherwise would. They don't feel as engaged and connected to the community as they did in 2019. Again, kind of a natural outcome of the isolation that the pandemic forced in the interest of preventing the spread of COVID-19. They are also relying heavily on deliveries, both goods and services, much more so than they did in 2019. And as I mentioned, the daily internet use has increased by more than an hour on average for your residents in the past 2 years. And so with this, I end my presentation. I welcome questions from council if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. McClarney. I feel so fortunate that we've been doing these surveys with you on a regular basis because your findings are so fascinating, especially now. So I will open it up to questions from my colleagues. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate the service. Great to get the insight and in particular to kind of see how things have shifted, particularly in terms of the priorities for the community as well. I think that was helpful to get a good comparison of that. And one question, and one I was a little bit, surprised on the neighbor question, sort of the response on that, because it seems to me like that would indicate that there was obviously people not getting out, but people also that there was a lot of people moving in and out of neighborhoods potentially, right? Because if everyone's the same person on the block, you either know them or don't know them regardless of the pandemic. But it's interesting to me because my sense was maybe there was more movement in and out of town than than I expected over the last couple of years. So I don't know if there's an answer for that, but I'm just more pointing that out, that that's an interesting sort of data point for me.
Yeah, one of the unexpected kind of developments of the pandemic, I think if at the beginning you wouldn't have thought this was going to be the case, but the last time we had a big recession, right? What happened? The housing market tanked, right? And people were losing homes, not really moving around intentionally. This time, what you saw is the housing market took off. Why? In part because you had a lot of people, now that I'm working from home, if I'm going to do this,
right, I
need a different situation. So there was a fair amount of mobility during this period of time. Plus interest rates were really low. So that kind of helped it. So, I mean, I don't have any hard data on San Carlos, but I do know that it's been a really hot real estate market over the past 2 years, in part because of that.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that. The second question I had, and just for clarification on the ADU question you asked about rentals. Was that just a generic you plan to rent out, or was there any sort of indication of short-term versus long-term rentals around that? That would be sort of an interesting data point for me to know. Oh, are you thinking to do an Airbnb, or are you really going to rent out and are we getting more housing out of it?
That's a great question. We did not make that distinction. We simply said, do you plan to rent the accessory dwelling unit for supplemental income? But I think your question's a great one, because it is, I'm sure their neighbors think so. It's a big difference between getting in a renter who's a kind of a full-time renter versus having an Airbnb situation.
Right. Okay. That's just how I just want to get clarification as I think about that data. So appreciate it. Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all the questions I have.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. We'll turn it over to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tim, always good to see you. I always feel like you're kind of the guy that comes on the news shows with all the interesting travel logs and things like that.
Good to see you as well.
I really appreciate your taking the pulse of our community. One thing that did kind of jump out at me was the electric vehicle ownership more than doubling in 3 years. I mean, that's almost 2.5 times in the last 3 years. And it tells me that even though we've added more chargers, it's probably something that we as a council need to think about, is find more places to add more car charging, because I don't see this trend going away. I mean, we basically primarily 20% of our city population driving an electric car now. So that's something that I'm hoping that we'll take a closer look at in the future. And the home delivery explains why we see all the traffic around our streets. I don't think a day goes by. I don't think 2 hours goes by where I don't see an Amazon or some other delivery vehicle coming up and down my street. So anyway, thank you again. Great presentation. I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councilmember Collins. We'll go to Councilmember Dugan and then Councilmember Farmer-LaPan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Dr. McLarney. It's a good report, and I'm glad you've been involved as long as you have and can kind of share the changes and trends, et cetera. That's what's really useful here. My question is actually for our city manager, Jeff, and I would just open-ended, this is good and informative to the council. It's interesting. Was there any particular takeaways that staff has gleaned? Is this, and are there any learnings here that's going to, influence or adjust or change anything we're going to be doing as a city this year?
Well, I'm not sure that anything's going to change or adjust, but, there are, a number of things in the survey that, I find, and I imagine your mind was probably triggered the same way. We've spent a lot of time and we're investing a lot of money in doing a downtown plan. And, it feels good to see that, those conversations and discussions and things that we've been working on and are going to be continuing to work on are important and have actually increased in importance to our community. so it tells me that, we're on the right track in what we're working on. The affordable housing metric, we've watched that rise over the last number of years. This is obviously, I think, probably the single biggest jump we've seen. So our efforts that we started, a number of years ago now to educate the community about affordable housing definitely seem worthwhile. And I think will pay dividends to the city and the community as real projects with, real issues that affect real people start to come in. And we struggle with those issues and projects, knowing that we have a more informed, supportive community will be helpful. So there are actually quite a few data points in there. It's interesting to see just some of the day-to-day life. Things change, the COVID comparison really was a fascinating one. We talked about at the staff level as we were kind of preparing the survey, that we just kind of fell backwards into, sort of a historical moment in terms of being able to capture that data. And so I think it will be interesting 2 years from now when we do the survey again to see, are things shifting, what's shifting back towards the historical norm and what is, sort of becoming the new way people are living their life. Things about the electric vehicles and food and good delivery were something that were already on our radar, before the pandemic, and we were interested in regards to even the downtown. Are people going to be, should we be as focused on parking in the future as we have been for the last 30 years in the downtown, or is everybody going to be taking, sort of alternative forms of transportation in the future with ride and vehicle sharing programs and that kind of thing? That we maybe need to start focusing on new types of infrastructure that we don't have for drop-off areas and, those kinds of things. So I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't, to read through the full results because it definitely, I think, will trigger ideas and issues for you as an elected official that are going to naturally kind of come into play as projects and programs and things come forward. Where you could say, oh, wait a minute, this is something that's, growing in importance in our community. And it makes sense in this project that we maybe think about that where, council members, haven't had to wrestle with that particular issue in regards to a project in the past. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your perspective on that. That's all I have.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Dr. McLarney, for the very thorough and interesting report. It is really helpful to get some insights in terms of, what the dynamics are within our community. I concur with Councilmember Collins around the EV chargers and maybe, doubling down on our efforts in that particular area. I did sense some frustration when I read through the report for people who own these cars. And I know as a board member for Peninsula Clean Energy, that's something that we continually look at is, how can we continue to encourage adoption of EV vehicles and make it easier for people to do so. So that's something I'll keep in mind as we go back. I kind of enter those conversations. It was nice to see the walking and bike usage up. I know we have a community activist who's been really encouraging us to move in that direction. And there was a family ride not too long ago where there was a couple hundred people, and I think maybe Vice Mayor or Mayor McDowell was actually on that. As we build out the bike and master plan, I would hope that we actually see those numbers continue to climb. It does induce, healthy habits for people to get out of their cars and, go on foot or on bike. The other thing that was also notable, not only around the amount of people working from home, but also the fact that, for example, Caltrain usage has declined. It seemed somewhat significantly, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. McLarney, from your perspective. I know just in general, public transportation usage is down. And would you say that our numbers there were somewhat reflective of what we're seeing broadly in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the numbers are down from where they were. In general, what we've seen is they're starting to climb back. right? And the expectations are that at some point they will get back to close to their pre-pandemic levels in terms of use of transit. In a lot of the regions that we've looked at, both the Bay Area and Southern California, but they're still not there yet.
Okay, all right, thank you. The other thing I noted too about the demographics was just the lack of, or just the concentration, I guess, of professions in certain areas. I do know that, for example, I've heard it anecdotally that our schools lose about 30% of our teachers on the annualized basis due to the cost of living here in San Carlos. So it was encouraging to see that the interest in more affordable housing was higher than it has been in years past for that reason. In addition, it also appeared to me, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. McLarney, that the number of people who felt that we had too much development was lower than it had been. Did you observe that in your findings?
So it was still the number one sort of off the cuff response about what change you'd like to see. But what is interesting is the next two items that actually sum up to more than that first item were providing more affordable housing and providing more variety of restaurants and stores. So you have one group, smaller group, that's saying we want less development. You have a somewhat larger group whose number one issue would essentially be more affordable housing, more development, and more access to stores and restaurants.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. And then the final thing, I just noted the lack of connectedness, that's declined. And I'm hopeful that with our ability to get back to some of these in-person events, that the next report that comes out in 2 years will have a vastly different look and feel to it. And perhaps the concerns around mental health too will decline as a result. So very fascinating, but thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. I'll build on Laura's comments with regard to the community feeling less engaged as one of the effects of the pandemic. And I too am really looking forward to having our in-person events back. And perhaps the city can do a little more advertising about our block party offerings with permits. I know Adams Block does a block party and my block does a block party. And it's certainly a great way for neighbors to reconnect and meet the new people who have moved in over the last couple of years. So that's one of my takeaways as an action item from this data. I also really appreciated the data on the online shopping. I think that is just a 20% increase from 2019 is a really big increase, and it's not surprising, but it does tell me that shopping habits continue to change. And it's, kind of spurred me to continue thinking about, how this data pertains to our downtown planning initiative and how do we encourage shopping locally when the trend is to shop online? What can we do as a city to encourage shopping local? Does shopping need to become more of an experience where shoppers come and stay to dine and shop? So I don't know really what the answer is, but I can see that the trends are pushing us forward into thinking about retail in a new way. So really interesting data and just really appreciate the effort. So I don't see any other hands raised. So Crystal, perhaps I'll open it up to public comments at this moment, specifically regarding the community characteristics survey. Is there anyone in the waiting room?
I do not see any hands up for this item.
Okay. Any final thoughts from Dr. McLarney or staff or council members?
Mayor McDowell, if I could just make one remark, just to add on your ideation around, how we reimagine shopping locally with the proliferation of online shopping. I was in Burlingame this past weekend, and I noted that, or actually it wasn't there, it was another area where they actually had lockers where people would have their items delivered downtown and then come in and pick them up. So that was curious to me as a way to potentially, reduce traffic and, maybe something for us to consider as we're doing this downtown plan is how can we integrate people's propensity to want to do online shopping, but also encourage them to get back out into the community and connect with one another. And I like your idea that where you're going with that is to patronize our local businesses.
Thanks for adding that. Any other comments? Okay, Dr. McClarney, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you as always.
Yep.
For my colleagues, I note that it's 8:51. I typically take a break after 2 hours. What is the will of the council? Would you like a 10-minute break at this point before we embark on our downtown items?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. We'll recess for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Great. At this time, we will call the meeting back to order and we will move on to study session 9B, discuss and provide direction to staff on the San Carlos Avenue Quick Build Pilot Program Project C2107. And I assume this is Stephen Machida. Go ahead,
Yes.
Stephen.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council members, Stephen Machida, Public Works Director. So this item before you tonight is we're going to really talk about the San Carlos Avenue Quick Build project. So basically really high elevation kind of view of the project. This project is really going to be constructing some bike lanes as well as some additional pedestrian space on San Carlos Avenue between Elm and El Camino Real. So next slide, please. So the Quick Build grant basically was an application that we submitted back in July of 2020. Really, the project really is intended to address safety needs and build improvements rather quickly using really low to moderate cost materials, which would, once finished, allow the community to test and try those improvements. The intention is really to use this really low and moderate cost materials, which has a duration probably about 1 to 5 years. We actually received the grant in December 2020 of $274,000. Next slide, please. So the countermeasures or the improvements basically are from Elm Street to El Camino. It includes all of this traffic striping, kind of the pavement markings, bike lanes, prefabricated curb ramps or rubber curbs, bollards or delineators, high visibility crosswalk, and signage. So as you can tell, a lot of the improvements are really going to be very temporary. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through really quickly the limits of the study. So basically, starting from Elm to Walnut, we're going to have some high visibility sidewalks, as well as bike lane strips. Basically, we have 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, westerly and easterly. We have a 5-foot bike lane and 7-foot parking sides on each side of the street. Next slide, please. So from Walnut to Laurel, similar to Elm, we're going to have some high visibility crosswalk as well as the kind of the bike skip boxes and some sharrows. However, in Walnut, that's when we start to transition from a standard bike lane to what we call the buffered bike lane. So the vehicle lanes kind of remain at 10-foot lane width, 2 lanes in each direction. And the buffered bike lanes on the south side would have a buffer on each side of the lane. So 2-foot buffer on each side of the lane on the south side and a 3-foot buffer on the north side. We're maintaining the parallel parking on the north side. However, the parking on the south side, so this is in front of the Wheeler garage, would actually have to go away. And that additional space would be kind of used for pedestrian space. And then, as I mentioned, they would install some of this prefabricated or rubber type ADA ramps at various locations along Walnut. Next slide, please. Now from Laurel to El Camino, this is where the real challenge kind of comes. Again, going Laurel, we're using the high visibility crosswalk, got skip bike green boxes as well as sharrows, and we take it across Laurel. But from there, you know, we want to kind of continue the buffered bike lanes. The unfortunate thing is when we actually supplied or submitted our grant, this was prior to kind of the approval of the city's parklet program. This is in early 2020. The application was based on there's parklets or the parking, the angled parking on the south side as well as on the north side would not contain, or at least we could use that area for the pedestrian space. But as council is well aware, since probably in 2020, we've started using that area for the outdoor parklets. So we had our consultant kind of evaluate kind of the geometrics, the layout of the street in this at this block, and really determined we just couldn't fit in the buffered bike lane while still maintaining the parklets either on the north or the south side within this reach. So we're here really to kind of seek direction from council on, you know, how best to proceed. Unfortunately, you know, we would like to say we would like to do both, but it's unfortunate that I don't believe that we really be able to construct it and still construct it safely. So next slide, please. So the option available to council is to pursue grant funding and then implement the improvements, but what that would require is to remove the existing parklets. Second option is the existing parklets to remain, but then we would forego the grant allocation and then not install the improvements. Or third, provide staff with alternative direction. However, I do want to add, knowing that, you know, most of the improvements are all striping and kind of intended to be temporary, and knowing how really popular the parklets have been, it really is staff's recommendation that the city forego the grant funding and then keep the parklets in play. As council is well aware, you know, we're in the process of looking through the downtown plan. So we will have opportunities in the future to, assuming that the approval of the downtown plan, that we could, you know, probably cobble in at some other projects that, you know, could actually accomplish the same thing that the quick build project is hoping to do. And the reason why we're bringing this to you is, you know, there is a time clock on when we actually need to use the funds. And so this is one of the reasons why, you know, we need direction from council. And with that, that concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Are there any questions from my colleagues this evening? We'll go to Councilmember Palmer-Lohan and then Councilmember Dugan.
All right, thank you. Stephen, thank you so much for the presentation and forwarding a recommendation. Could you talk a little bit about the grant funding process and how that works if we were to not accept it? It appears that it has been allocated and we've had it for about a year or so. Does that mean that we've taken receipt of the funds and are sitting on them, or you have to initiate the work and then you take receipt of the dollars? And then are there any kind of penalties, I guess, if we were to forego the grant funding for kind of future opportunities? I'm just trying to understand if there's any kind of financial implications for us in present or future.
So that's an excellent question. So this is the type of grant where we actually have to do the improvements before we, and then get reimbursed back. So we have up to $274,000 to, you know, to use for these improvements. You know, certainly from a public works director standpoint, you never really like to give up grant funding. And although there isn't really a penalty associated with it by giving it up, I think there is, it becomes perhaps a little bit more difficult to gain funding in the future, knowing that, well, you know, you actually kind of gave up some of the grant funding in the past. However, you know, as I mentioned, I think with the downtown plan, if we could couple in a large enough project, you know, that we might be able to actually kind of make it worthwhile to delay the project to get something that we would really want and really would function correctly.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the overview, Stephen. And I appreciate that staff is being thoughtful on, you know, the impacts on the parklets and that you're actually recommending we forego it. I do appreciate that. I guess my questions would be, you know, and mostly because I think our downtown specific plan will be that comprehensive, you know, seeking input, community engagement, and that full holistic process that will really let us make good decisions on all this. So this definitely isn't something we should be shooting from the hip on. So I agree with your recommendation. My question, though, is, you know, all that complexity is really from Laurel to El Camino. You know, is it possible for us to still do the improvements between Walnut and Laurel? And if not, you know, or could we use this grant money for other similar improvements elsewhere in the city? I mean, are we really locked in and we can't make other use of this grant money?
So the focus of this grant is actually from Elm to El Camino. So, you know, we did ask about the possibility of, you know, could we partially install some of the other portions that perhaps aren't in conflict. And unfortunately, the response that we got was it was kind of all or nothing. It's either you have to do all the improvements or, you know, you're really not entitled to get reimbursed back. You know, as an aside, if that's something that council would, I mean, we would probably, you know, we could possibly do kind of the portion between Elm to perhaps Laurel or just short of Laurel. But that wouldn't be at you know, kind of using grant funds. We would have to kind of cobble something together internally with our own funds.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
I don't see any other hands raised. Stephen, I have a quick question for you. What's the outreach process to the businesses that would be impacted? I know that, you know, maybe you don't want to reach out too early because the grant hasn't been awarded, but then, you know, reaching out later, people feel kind of blindsided. How does business outreach work with these projects?
So on these type of projects, I mean, we would have to actually, depending on if council wishes to move the project forward, we would have to immediately kind of work with, you know, make the outreach to the affected businesses. I think council may have received maybe 2 or 3 emails here just recently kind of some of the businesses that probably are objecting to moving forward with the project, knowing that they just recently either started or just completed their parklets on San Carlos Avenue, and they prefer actually to keep it rather than to perhaps only have it available for the next, let's say, 2 to 3 months. So, you know, we have wanted to try to meet with them. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, you know, when we originally applied for the project, we hadn't anticipated having the parklets there, and so we thought we had a clear space that we could actually just try it, and then ultimately, if the improvements needed to go away as a result of parklets, you know, we could just remove it. Unfortunately, you know, certainly we didn't anticipate, you know, going into the 3rd year of COVID, and so, you know, our timing just got, you know, we really didn't understand the timing as well as perhaps we should have. So, but to answer your question, yeah, I think we would, if it is the direction to move forward, we would want to talk to immediately talk to all the businesses.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there any other questions before I open it up to public comments? And then we'll do council discussion after that. Okay, seeing none, Crystal, could we move along to public comment, please? So those wishing to make a public comment on this specific agenda item, San Carlos Avenue Quick Build Pilot Program, you can join us by Zoom or by phone. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room tonight?
Yes, we have one hand up for Sonia Elks. Sonia?
Yes, hi, thanks for taking my call. Thank you for sharing that update, Stephen. And I'm really disappointed to hear that quick build project isn't possible given the parklets. I totally understand that would get squeezed in there. I'm assuming there's no way to narrow the parklets or make them longer and narrower instead of wide, you know, but I think that would take up more If that would take up more parking, I'm not sure. But anyway, I'm disappointed to hear that, but I am also grateful to hear that you are cognizant that this could be built into a better overall plan in the downtown project as it's being redone, because it is super, super important that bicyclists, micromobility users can access downtown, can pick up their own food, can, shop our lovely downtown stores and enjoy our terrific space, without needing to bring single occupancy vehicles downtown. I really loved Councilmember Parma Lohan's thought about pickup areas for downtown for what you described seeing in Burlingame. I think it was that would bring people downtown that could pick up their things. Micromobility devices are excellent for that. So I'm glad to hear that will be prioritized in the downtown specific plan. And I'm sad about this, but I understand the circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Up next is Jackie Campos. You should be able to unmute.
Hello?
Hi, yes. Oh. Jackie, it looks like you have muted yourself. Oh, there you go.
Oh, here. Okay, sorry. So I actually am from the La Corneta, one of the businesses that is going to have to, if this were to go through, would have to destroy their parklet. And I just want to say I'm really appreciative that you guys understand how important they are to struggling businesses. We're barely looking at a great year this year, finally again. The parklet is a huge part of it. We just spent like $18,000. It literally got done like 2 weeks ago. We were so excited. And today I got a call from our manager saying, they want to take all the parklets down on San Carlos Avenue. I completely understand bicyclists need to be safe and everything, but I do believe if it was just something that's going to be temporary for 1 to 5 years, these parklets have been built. I mean, I know our neighbors spent even more money than we did. They spent over $25,000. I believe Saffron spent that. They recently also just built them. I mean, if we had known in hindsight that this was something that was a possibility, we would have never spent all of this money. And again, like I said, I understand, but it's already been an extremely rough year, which it seems you guys all understand. I'm very appreciative of. We just had to deal with a lawsuit, as our neighbors did as well, from the ADAs, which we already thankfully had to spend a lot of money, but we were thankfully able to fix all of our issues. Now we're completely ADA compliant, but it's just kind of, it's been a struggle. It's been an extreme struggle these past 2 years. And this just adds to something that I believe, it would only hurt us so much more when we're just barely getting back up on our feet.
Thank you, Jackie. And there are no further hands.
Okay, thank you, Crystal, and thank you to our callers. I'll open it up for council discussion at this time. I will go to Councilmember Parma Lohan, then Councilmember Dugan, then Vice Mayor Rath.
Yeah, thank you. From my perspective, when I read this, I think that COVID continues to create ambiguity, and it hasn't been a straight line as we expected it would be, right? When we first started this, we thought we were going to be in it for 2 weeks, and then it just continues to get prolonged. So I think, through no fault of anyone's own, COVID just continues to be a disruptive force and impacts our ability to move forward on, key improvements that we want to make in our community, and finding that balance is really important. I think in light of the fact that we're investing in a downtown site-specific plan where I think we can take a holistic view of the whole of the downtown with respect to, circulation and how we utilize that with multiple touch points with, all stakeholders. I would be in favor of, foregoing this project and having a little egg on our face with the fund grantors, but hopefully they'll understand our situation take us, under consideration later when we go back to them. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I think, this is a pretty easy decision here this evening. And I appreciate staff's sensitivity around the parklets and how disrupting that at this point likely doesn't make sense. And but happily, we're kicking off a major effort to deeply study and engage on our downtown, and that'll be the right forum for us to really figure out where all of these various interests and it's we got a lot of work in front of us on this downtown planning, and we really need to be doing that in full partnership with our community, and that's what we will get from that specific plan. So I'm glad we're not moving forward with anything fast and quick that the community might be surprised by. And I look forward to the full and robust deep discussion we'll have around the downtown specific plan.
Thanks, John. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just agree with my colleagues that I think appreciate Stephen's work on this and his recommendation. I would agree that we should forego the funding. Just doesn't seem prudent at this time, given lots has changed. So I will be supporting the staff recommendation to forego the funding.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. I will concur with my colleagues. I agree that foregoing the funding is the appropriate move at this time. I do feel for the business owners who were panicked today about the prospect of losing their parklet. So I guess my one, question or kind of feedback is how, I know Stephen, your staff went through a lot of work going through the grant process. It's time consuming to apply for grants. And I'm just going forward wondering, how we do give businesses a heads up and the appropriate timing for that. And I certainly don't know the answer, but something that I'm thinking about as a result of the process. So, but I agree, it's not prudent, and we're embarking on this big downtown plan now, and that's the more appropriate vehicle to pursue this. So, thank you. Councilmember Collins, did you want to chime in at all?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. I support not moving forward. I think it's, nice idea, but not workable. So
yeah, I'm
good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Stephen, did you need any other further guidance from council this evening on this item?
Well, thank you for all your guidance, and certainly we appreciate council's understanding.
All right, so now we will move on to 9C, discuss and provide direction to staff on a temporary parklet fee structure for the use of the public right-of-way while the outdoor dining program is in effect. And I believe this is probably Stephen as well.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Okay.
it is, Madam. So good evening again, Stephen Machida, Public Works Director. So the item before you is actually to be brought as a result of the ad hoc subcommittee requesting that an item be brought before the full council to discuss the fee structure for the temporary parklets in the downtown. The next slide, please. So the temporary parklet program basically was started back in June 2020. The program really has been a huge success. However, with COVID restrictions lessened, I think the ad hoc subcommittee requested that staff evaluate the fee structure that could be applied to the temporary parklets in the right-of-way. So next slide, please. So prior to actually bringing something to council, what staff really wanted to do was actually kind of take a survey of all the parklet owners and see how they would feel if, in fact, a fee would be charged. So staff contacted all the 36 parklet owners and had a meeting in December 2021. Of the 36 park owners, 12 actually were able to attend. There's one other individual, actually, she sent an email. Unfortunately, she could not attend, and she is actually from the Reading Bug, and actually she really kind of opposed any type of fee structure for the outdoor parklet because she really felt that she did provide a kind of a free service for a lot of the community to provide story time for the kids, and then as well as the pottery store. in the downtown. So that is something that, you know, from staff's perspective, it does make sense, and it is something that probably we may want to actually discuss with council as well. But anyway, of the 12 that we met on December 20th, or December 2021, approximately 4 would support some type of fee. However, they would prefer that a fee be based on square footage as compared to a flat rate. Some of the owners actually requested the fee be waived until the end of the program, or September 1st, 2022. And their reasoning is, you know, they felt they actually made improvements to the parklets, and they based that on the end, or September 1st, 2022. And so they would prefer to waive that, have the fee waived. And then others would like to have the parklet, their current parklets, become permanent. Next slide, please. So taking that all into account and kind of looking at the, you know, trying to accomplish or have a per square foot cost, we're going to actually present 3 different options for council to consider. The first option is to do a no fee encroachment permit. I mean, that's essentially, it's a status quo. So whatever our program that we initially started 2 years ago, it would remain the same. So basically, it's a no cost encroachment permit fee. Staff would continue to do regular inspections of the parklets. The street, sidewalk, and water barriers would continue to be clean, but those costs would all be absorbed by the city. So looking at what the cost would be, and we currently, for the clean of the street, sidewalk, and water barrier, it's about contract about $56,000. And this is for the 600 to the 800 block, as well as the 1100 and 1200 block of San Carlos Avenue. We would also have a senior maintenance worker kind of provide some oversight of the contract. So this is an annual cost of $57,200. So option 1 is, again, no change to the program or 0 cost to the parklet owner. Next slide, please. Option 2 would be an encroachment permit fee plus cleaning costs. So this essentially is, we're trying to recapture their costs. So our current encroachment permit fee is $539.54. However, we would charge that every 6 months. So for a cost of $1,029.08 annually. The annual cleaning costs from above would remain the same, $57,200. And then, you know, we're able to calculate that area, the 600 to the 800 block of Laurel Street and 1100 block to 1200 block on San Carlos Avenue, and that's 2,434 feet. So taking the 57,200 divided by 2434, you get a cost of $23 per foot for cleaning. So under this option, and assuming the annual fee for a standard 300 square foot parklet, which we kind of did an analysis, in a 30-foot frontage, you get a cost of $1,784.08. So that includes the 1079 encroachment permit fee and this $705 for cleaning, and this would be an annual cost. Next slide, please. So the third option, that would be actually the rent, an encroachment permit fee, as well as cleaning costs. So after, you know, several evaluations and calling up several cities throughout the peninsula, we really kind of determined to kind of work off the City of Mountain Views program. And so their program is based on a 20-year program that actually they installed, you know, actually 20 years ago. And it seems to be working quite well. So they base their rent on 9% of the market rent for a fully improved retail space. So because this is not outdoor, they took 9%. So we took, using their model, we looked at LoopNet, and the average retail rent in San Carlos is about $39.70 per square foot per year. So taking 9% of the $39.70, we get $358 per square foot per year. Again, using the standard 300 square foot parklet with a 30-foot frontage, we get an annual fee of $23.1854, where $10.74 would be for rent, the $539.54 would be the encroachment permit fee, and the $705 would be the cleaning fee. So next slide, please. So just in summary, we have 3 options. The first option, as I mentioned, is a no change to the program, or it's a zero fee endeavor. Option 2 would be encroachment permit plus the cleaning costs, and it'd be $17.84 And option 3 would be the rent, encroachment permit fee, as well as cleaning costs, or $23.1854. And again, all three options kind of do compare apples to apples. The cost was based on 300 square foot parklet with a 30-foot frontage along the street. And then just wanted to kind of point out that, we're currently going through a user fee study. So this is the current encroachment fee of $539.54 is what we're currently using. However, after the encroachment permit study is completed and the council adopts it, those fees may go up. Next slide, please. So the options available to the City Council is to provide direction on setting a temporary parklet fee for the use of the public right-of-way while outdoor dining is in effect, or provided a staff with an alternate direction. I think it really is staff's recommendation to at least charge option 2, which would be the 1784 as a bare minimum, and that would essentially cover our costs for cleaning as well as inspection and some administrative costs. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there questions from the council this evening? Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lower my hand. Stephen, thanks for the presentation and for the work on this. And I will say I agree that we need to be charging some. This has cost us a significant amount of funds, and we should be charging some fee for this. Can you? But at the same time, I would say I'm not sort of looking to that this should be something that it should be a huge revenue generator for the city. I mean, my goal would be to kind of cover our costs and make sure that that's sort of happening. Do we know how many parklets would be affected by this fee?
That's actually a good question. So we have 36 parklets that we have kind of on our record. As I mentioned earlier, the other two, the Reading Bug as well as the Pottery, they certainly make a very good case about, since they do provide a service to the city, it would probably make sense for if council were to not charge us this kind of encroachment, or, it'd be a status quo for them. Since they're not really making, or they're not making money as a result of the parklet, they're actually providing a service to the community versus the other parklets that perhaps are doing for some type of fee, whether it's kind of restaurant or other retail. So I think currently I believe we have 36 parklets.
Okay.
That includes the restaurant owners or the restaurants as well as the winery.
Okay. And so, yeah, and that makes sense, I think, because if we're sort of looking at places that are revenue generating versus not revenue generating, they're sort of using that space for revenue generation versus not, right? I mean, I guess the question would be sort of if a retail place was using that to sell, would we want to think about that differently versus it's just sort of a more community space to that point? So I agree with that assessment. Okay. And I think I guess I know you've sort of offered these three different options, let's say two that really are kind of, from my view, on where I'd like to focus. Do you have a thought around, sort of the square footage versus just sort of a flat fee kind of approach on this, given that you've got some parklets that are much more expansive than others, right? So I think it's the impact of the benefit is obviously much smaller for, let's say, a number 5 kitchen who's got just a much smaller outdoor space, or versus, let's say, Town or West Park Bistro or other ones who have are taking up much more space and much more cost, and their revenue generation from those spaces is much different.
Right. So I think their intent, and I apologize if I didn't make this clear, but the original intent, I based it on the kind of 300 square foot average size parklet, and that was just to provide kind of make that comparison. However, if in fact you have a parklet that's larger, it would be charged more based on the square footage. So we saw the cost for 2350, but we'd also kind of escalate it based on square footage. If you have a parklet that's smaller than the 300 square feet, that fee per square foot would actually, you charge the same square footage, but by multiple by the square footage would be much lower. So it's kind of not really a sliding scale, but it's really based on the size of the parklet and then the frontage of, how long, what is the length along the street that they're taking.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I guess that would also sort of allow those restaurants, if we were to go this route, to make that sort of business decision if they have space that's underutilized out any parklet space. They may say, you know what, I'm going to sort of give that back to the street, back to the city, because it's not penciling out for me financially, but at least that gives them the opportunity to make that decision at that point. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. We'll move on to Councilmember Palmer Lohan and then Councilmember Collins.
Thank you. So just to kind of build on the idea, Stephen, with respect to the Breeding Bug and Laurel Street Arts, I'm kind of looking at that situation as both of those companies or businesses have indoor space that they were using, but I think due to COVID and safety and the fact that, much of their clientele are younger, it makes sense to me to allow them to continue to operate outside, because of those reasons, without necessarily imposing the parklet fee, because it's not like they've been able to expand their square footage of retail space, as it were, right? Whereas the restaurants cannot allow indoor dining as well as outdoor dining. So with respect to, I've got two questions. One around kind of what we are. So I heard Councilmember or Vice Mayor Rack talk about kind of revenue generation for the city, but my understanding is that as a city, it's like cost recovery is a slightly different concept that we have to adhere to. So do each of these options presented fall into that category with respect to justifiable cost recovery, or are some slightly north of that? And I don't know if that would be you to answer that question, or perhaps City Attorney Rubens.
Well, let me take a first shot. So I believe the options 2 and 3 obviously do provide the cost recovery. So the standard encroachment is based on our user fee, which kind of we do analysis, and it looks at kind of the effort it is to process the encroachment permit fees. What we're suggesting is to do this twice a year, at least for option 2, and then for several reasons. One is that it provides us the opportunity, number one, to maybe keep track of the parklet owners that they're kind of complying with the rules, that their regular inspections are actually being conducted. We're also making sure that the insurance or any liability that might be associated with having a parklet on the street are, we're making sure that they do have the insurance certificates up to date. And then the cleaning costs, as I mentioned, is based on the contract that we use, contract services, as well as the cost recovery for our senior maintenance work who oversees the work of this contractor. So I believe, certainly the second phase also does the cost recovery. And then the third option, or option 3, is very similar in that option 2 is that, the first one is we're just kind of looking at the rent or utilization of the street right away. The encroachment permit, again, is more the administrative costs to evaluate as they apply, making sure that they do have their insurance and, everything is supplied, that it's appropriate and everything's up to date. And then again, the cleaning cost is kind of across the board, it would be the similar. So I believe both options 2 and 3 are kind of a different way of looking for cost recovery.
Yeah.
And
Greg,
just to clarify, I think we're in the cost recovery aspects of this. It's not the same as a mitigation fee that we were talking about earlier. It's something. It's a use of a city resource, and there's a different way of analyzing this. I think that's probably what Mountain View and Burlingame have done in their analysis of setting the fee. It's not such a high fee that it's not in the range of what it really costs us to operate the program. but it's just not the same as the fee that we have been relying on previously, which is just our basic encroachment permit fee.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just want to clarify, it's not that we're doing this to try to make money off of it as a city. It's more or less to pay for the cost of administering the program. Is that correct?
I think that's the way we've been looking at it. And I don't know. I mean, we because of the nature of the program, we didn't do a full nexus study because I know it seemed to be something that'd be pretty cumbersome for a temporary closure program. But I think it's in the range of what it costs us really comprehensively to operate.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You know, the overall revenue dollars involved in this program aren't the type of revenue dollars that, you know, I don't think if revenue was our justification, the overall work would justify the amount of revenue that we're getting back from a program like this. But our discovery is that, you know, in the future, the council could charge, you know, could seek to charge more market rate for the space and make revenue generation a priority if that's something that council wanted to do. But in this sort of interim phase, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to us because we don't ultimately know, you know, what the whole thing looks like down there 2 years from now after the downtown plan. So trying to rely on, you know, creating revenue right now seems a little bit premature as opposed to recovering our costs and making sure we're not expending money on the business enterprise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, depending on the options the council adopts with the comprehensive plan, trying to use the right term here, the lay of maybe not a great metaphor, but the lay of the land in downtown, it might be different depending on what decisions you know.
All right, that's helpful. I appreciate the distinction and the frameworks that we could consider moving forward. And then my next question is around timing. So I noted in the staff report that June will be the second year anniversary of the street closure and parklet program. From an administrative perspective, and I saw that there was sort of mixed feedback from the restaurant owners. What are the thoughts around when the timing might be initiated with respect to implementation of a fee should council decide to go in that direction?
You know, I think it's really staff's kind of perspective is that, you know, we would probably want to do it sooner rather than later. Certainly not wait till the September 1st of 2022, but probably within a month or so. I think, you know, as I mentioned, you know, from the discussion, and certainly we didn't talk to all parklet owners, but, you know, there seemed to be a acceptance of actually paying some type of fee for the parklets.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Stephen, I thought I had a pretty clear understanding between these two options, but kind of what jumps out at me is that I'm having a hard time figuring out, other than the money, which is, you know, a difference of what, about less than $600 a year. Is there any particular advantage with going with the, what I'll call the Mountain View option 3? I mean, is there something that gives us that, other than cost recovery, that option 2 does not?
I think, you know, from staff's perspective, what we wanted to try to kind of give council kind of a bracket range of, you know, costs or fee that could be charged, you know, and could be justified. The reason why we were looking at it from a rent perspective standpoint and kind of using the Mountain View kind of model is that kind of, you know, put specifically that what they're doing is renting that area kind of in front of their establishment. And so that would actually have some additional document, but it would actually kind of, you know, it's like a lease document that you would normally pay, sign and pay for any type of office building that you might have. But we're just taking that 9%. So, you know, it's perhaps it is something that was justified. I know Mountain View, City of Mountain View had used this, as I mentioned earlier, for the 20 past years. It seemed to be working quite well for them. So we felt that it was probably a pretty strong model in light of that it had been in operation for, the past 20 years or so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because when I did the math, it's under $6.50 a day to do option 3. That's sort of a minimal amount. But I just wanted to make sure that if we decide on option 3 going forward rather than 2, that we can justify it and we can explain it and feel confident that we're doing the right thing going forward. Because I want to make sure that we don't. Yes, we recover our costs, but I don't want to get in a position where we're generating excess revenues when we probably don't need to. So that's my only thought on it. So.
Madam, through the mayor, one other aspect that's different is when you get into the rent concept here, it's more of a contractual relationship than a grant of a right under the encroachment permit. So we'd be working through those. It's probably would be a month to month as opposed to a terminate at will arrangement once we get into that. But it's a little different legally as far as what the trade-offs are.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Ron. Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple quick ones. Stephen, you mentioned we have a census of 36 parklets right now. Do we have any sense of how many of those are underutilized or, likely might choose not to go, that might, the owner might choose not to maintain the parklet because of this fee, and we might recover some parking because of that. Do we have any sense of that?
Unfortunately, I don't really have that information available. I know when we originally spoke to, the 12 parklet owners here back in December, they were all very anxious to kind of keep their parklets. And so I don't think, nobody was really kind of willing to give it up. However, as I mentioned, for the most part, they were very interested in rather just having a flat fee, using it on a square footage fee. That way they could kind of control the cost in that regard, as compared to if you have a smaller parklet, you're being charged the same as, a parklet owner that could be twice or double their size of theirs. So they really felt that was kind of the more appropriate. But I think, Councilman Rack brings up an excellent point that knowing that it is based on a square footage, and if they're not, parklet's not fully being utilized, they may actually want to contract their parklet or perhaps even, eliminate the parklet altogether.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. And then I know that Towns Parklet predated the pandemic. We had a program, and they were our first applicant, and they were kind of a pilot of the parklet program. I assume whatever we do here would apply equally, and that they're not grandfathered in under some, previous parklet program that would be exempt from this.
So I believe they only had one permanent parklet, or kind of the pilot parklet, and then the 2 others that kind of straddle the original one. That would be the temporary parklet. So the temporary parklet would be actually subject to these fees. Oh,
so Town's main parklet would not be subject to this?
That I probably want to talk a little bit more to the city attorney, because I know they actually had, I believe they modified their original one to accommodate more seats, if I'm not mistaken. So I probably want to look at that a little bit more closely.
There's a hybrid there because they've got some elements of the new program, I believe, and some elements of the original program. But I don't see why, when we come back to with whatever direction you're giving us, that the relevant fee wouldn't apply to the original structure.
Okay, so we are confident that what we do here would apply to their original structure as well.
There's no vested right to the original or any sort of separate agreement. agreement for the second deal. It's just by our grant of an encroachment permit. It's very similar model, so there's no vested right to.
Okay. All right. That's all I had. Thank you.
These have been great questions. I have a few as well. Stephen, how much do parklet owners currently pay? Do they pay a permit fee right now when they get ready to build a parklet?
No, they do not.
They pay nothing.
No, it's a no cost encroachment permit.
Okay, thank you. My second question, I noticed one difference, this is going back to Ron's question, between option number 2 and the Mountain View option number 3, is I noticed option number 2, the encroachment permit fee has to be paid every 6 months versus it looks like it's just annual in option number 3. And I'm wondering, it seems like that's being done to trigger an additional inspection and take a look at paperwork. Is that something necessary in your mind that things are inspected every 6 months?
I think yes, it probably really does need. I mean, a lot of it is kind of related to the weather. Obviously, as it gets cooler, you probably want more lights as well as heat. And then as in the summertime, you may perhaps you still may want the lights. However, you may want a different type of cooling, whether it's kind of a fan or a thing. So it's just a matter of making sure that the parklet owners or the parklets are kind of in compliance with current codes.
Okay, that's a good segue to my next question. Have you discussed with the building department if there's any major upgrades that we're expecting as we enter the next phase of our parklets and potentially allowing them for an additional amount of time? Do you think that building will come back to the current parklet owners and require any significant upgrades that would cost a substantial amount?
So, I have had some discussions with the building department. For the most part, many of the parklets were not constructed using building permits. And so there probably are certain areas, although they have actually inspected all of them, Public Works, Planning, Fire, and Building have all inspected the parklets out there currently, and if there's anything that we see noticeable that needs correction, they will kind of note it down. However, there's probably some other areas that the building department may wish to actually have addressed, as far as kind of making sure they meet building codes or just clearances for either ADA issues, related issues, or height restriction issues, things like that.
And does building have an idea on how much that might cost and when? Because I'm just recalling like our last discussion when we went through this, building was going to go out and require everybody to upgrade their electrical, and it was a significant expense because winter was coming and heaters were being used. So I'm trying to look into the future a little bit about costs for the parklet owners.
So I don't believe they actually have a cost. I think one of the things we're currently, from staff's perspective, we're working on some guidance that we could provide to all the parklet owners on the type of upgrades that we would be looking for them to install.
Okay. And my final question, and you mentioned this very briefly in your presentation, is about the parklet that's out in the industrial arts area. And I don't think that street is cleaned as frequently as Laurel Street. Maybe I'm wrong. But these fees would apply in the same way to the industrial arts parklets, or would it be based on a different equation?
I think for clarity, we'd probably, would recommend it would be the same fee would apply. However, that's certainly up to council's direction if they feel that a different methodology should be used.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions before we open it up to public comment? Okay, we'll move on to public comment and then we'll swing back to council discussion on this item. So if you would like to make a public comment on this item only, it's parklet fee structure, you may raise your hand or call in. Crystal, is anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, I do see one hand up at the moment from Mo Arshad.
Hi, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to raise my concern. I live in San Mateo and I have lots of friends in San Carlos. We go shopping and dine on Laurel Street, but sometimes I don't find parking during the day. I'm not sure why the city doesn't open the street to help retailers to have more parking space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
Thank you, Mo. And there are no further hands.
Okay, we will open it up to council discussion. Who would like to lead us off? Councilmember Parma Lohan, did you have your hand up or you take it? I saw it come up and then come down.
Yeah, I meant to have it up. No, I don't know where it went.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you and then the vice mayor.
Okay, so I would be in favor of initiating an encroachment parklet fee. I would be amenable to a carve out for companies like Reading Bug and Laurel Street Arts, where their customers need to be able to work outside for COVID safety. From a timing perspective, I think June sounds reasonable to me. I'm hearing that it can be implemented by then, and that would mark the 2-year anniversary. And I do appreciate the, split it in 2, right? So every 6 months, and that allows there to be kind of a check-in and making sure that records are up to date and that type of thing. And then, perhaps we kind of look at it on a go forward basis. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Beck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My hand. So I think I'm fine with the June. I think we should. I think we should do some sort of fee. It's costing us, and we should recover those costs. So starting in June, or as soon as Stephen feels like it's appropriate that he can get that up and running is certainly fine. From my perspective, I would like to carve out for the non-revenue generating places like the Reading Bug and the Pottery Place, because I do think they're not actually generating revenue off of those parklets. I think that's a reasonable, and they're not improved, frankly, really to the same degree as well. And then I think, Madam Mayor, you mentioned about the industrial arts area. I would like to look at that at potentially lower cost, because I do. My sense is they're probably not getting the same cleaning, and so if it's to cover the cleaning fees, I would like to sort of look at a lower fee for those places as well. I don't think they're getting the same. It's sort of less of a. It's almost a different way to look at it, I think, since they may not actually be generating revenue from the parklets themselves versus, so I think some reduced cost on that would be useful. And in terms of the fee, I guess I don't have a strong opinion around the rent piece versus just the sort of option 2 and 3 versus provided that it is done on a square footage basis. So there's some equity around, those larger businesses that are taking up more square footage, that the cost for the cleaning is higher, or the rent should be higher because they're generating more revenue and it is more impactful. So I'm kind of flexible on that. I'd actually be interested in what my other colleagues say on that, but I do want to make sure we're doing it sort of on a prorated basis based on size. And I'll reserve my time to come back to talk more.
We can do a second round. Councilmember Dugan and then Councilmember Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I think this is an appropriate time to, at a minimum, recover our costs. I think the Mountain View program, it's good that they have burned that in over 20 years with good reports. I think we should look at that. The difference is just having that rent component, which, reserving those parking spaces. I mean, that is a public right of way that we're dedicating for commercial use. So I do think a rec component is appropriate, given that, that is a public asset that we're allowing commercial use on. And I think that's what the rent component reflects. Option 3 is a little less than $200 a month. So I wouldn't view that as particularly burdensome. But it is always challenging to go from 0 to something. So, I would support, if my colleagues did, maybe even ramping into this over the course of a year, maybe start at 25% and at the end of the year, the full amount's being charged or something like that. If we did perceive this as burdensome in some way. The industrial arts area, if that made sense, we could be flexible there, or maybe we could just challenge ourselves to provide better cleaning services there and try to enhance that more as perhaps we do at Laurel. So maybe we could think about that one in that direction. And then whatever we do, though, I strongly support making on a per square footage basis. I think that's the only way we're going to see appropriately sized parklets, that aren't being underutilized or what have you. So I think per square foot makes the most sense, whatever we do. Thank you.
Thanks, John. We'll go to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, thank you, Stephen. We gave you a fair amount of work to do, and I appreciate your taking a look at all the options for us. I like the idea of a June implementation. I like the carve out that was mentioned for the the non-restaurant businesses. I tend to lean toward the Mountain View option simply because it's been successful for a long time. But I do agree with John that maybe we ought to have a sort of a staged implementation where maybe we break up the fees. I don't know, on a quarterly basis or something like that, or we charge a lesser amount the first year and then charge the full amount. We may have restaurants that decide that maybe it's not for them, or maybe they don't need as much. They don't need parklets to be as big as they thought they did. So that might give them an opportunity to evaluate whether or not it's worth it to them to pay the full rent. So. And I wasn't aware, I looked at this again and it was brought up about the industrial area. I kept thinking, or the industrial arts area, I kept thinking about this as a Laurel Street only program, but I'm not sure that I want to treat the industrial arts area the same as Laurel, and maybe that's problematical, but I'm going to need to know more about that. But for the time being, I like the direction we're headed, and I like the general feeling that I'm getting, through John and Laura and Adam. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, I'm going to chime in to wrap up round number 1, and then we will do round number 2 with Laura and Adam coming soon. So let's see, there's been a lot of great ideas tonight. I agree that we should base the program on square footage from an equity perspective. That seems fair. I too am supportive of carving out exceptions for the Reading Bug and Laurel Street Arts because they have different uses and are not generating revenue in the same way that others are. I agree with the June implementation. I think I'm leaning more towards option number 2, because I think that there has been so much uncertainty during the pandemic that we really need to be clear with the businesses about what they can expect and, how things will pencil out in the coming year. I think something that we have heard from our businesses is, what can we expect? How long is this going to happen? How do we plan? How do we move forward? And so while I understand, John and Ron talking about kind of easing into the rent, I think it's too complicated. I think it puts more uncertainty into an already uncertain process. I would prefer option 2 for now, and then maybe we talk about rent more in depth as part of the downtown plan.
I do see differences between, for example, San Carlos and Burlingame, where Burlingame was generating revenue from its parking spots via meters, and we never did that. Our parking spots did not generate revenue for the city. So we're not feeling that same pinch that other cities are. And I think that's important to distinguish. I also just want to caution to be just a little bit careful with our assumptions about restaurants and dining. I've dined downtown quite a bit in the last few weeks. And, while parklets might be full, I've been in restaurants where the only 2 tables indoors are full. So just because indoor dining is open doesn't mean it's being used at 100% capacity. I think there's still a preference for dining outdoors. And certainly, as has been mentioned tonight, COVID is unpredictable, and we could face another wave at some point where indoor dining is not used and outdoor dining becomes really important again. So I just want to caution about making assumptions. And I also do want to do some thinking about the industrial arts area, because those are not food businesses where lots of food is getting dropped. And I don't think it's getting cleaned in the same way. So I don't think that the fees should be applied in the same way. Okay, with that, I will turn it back to Councilmember Palmer-Lohan and then the Vice Mayor.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to lend my support for doing the fee based on square footage. I think that makes sense, and I appreciate Vice Mayor Ruck bringing that up at the start. And then as far as the industrial arts area goes, I mean, I think it might be just interesting to have a conversation with those folks to see, do they want increased cleaning, in which case we could potentially, have the same fee, so that's easier to administer, or are they satisfied with status quo? And if so, I'd be open to looking at an alternative model. So I think maybe just getting some input from them to understand what their needs are and how we could, provide support. So thank you for the opportunity to comment in round 2.
Vice Mayor Ruck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, so I appreciate all the comments. It's helpful to kind of go through and hear round 1 first. So I guess the only thing I would add is I wanted to agree with the mayor about not wanting to do some prorated rent piece that wraps up. I do think that gets confusing. At the same time, I am certainly, I think while we don't get direct revenue maybe from those parking spots, there are people that would park there that maybe would go shop or use restaurants or other things. And so there's some revenue that gets generated from, indirectly, I think, through sales tax or other things, potentially because of that. But so I'm fine if the majority, I could go either way in terms of if the majority wanted option 2 or option 3. If we went with option 3, I don't think we should prorate it. I think it should be just a fixed, the cost of what it is, and not confuse people. And I think we also have to remember that we are starting sort of year 3. We'll be starting, year 3 of this. We've had 2 years of costs already around this that, we're not trying to recoup necessarily, but, we've had, 2 years of rent of the orange barriers, of the cleaning, of everything else that Stephen's mentioned. And so that's not lost on me as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I would just chime in to say I totally agree with Sarah that whatever we do needs to be very clear here and predictable. I'm not sure that means we shouldn't ramp it in over time, but we could do that in a very clear, understandable way. Here's the total fee. Year 1, we're only going to charge you half. I mean, I think that would be appreciated and easily communicated. So we could, I think, accomplish that in a simple way. And then I appreciated Laura's perspective on the industrial arts area. Yeah, let's engage with them and see what makes the most sense to them. And I agree that they're on 2 levels. 1, their parklets are being used differently and aren't as significantly as revenue generating as restaurants. And number 2, I don't really think their parklets are necessarily chewing up parking that, you know, in the same valuable way that maybe our downtown parking gets chewed up by parklets. So their parklets probably aren't as impactful on others either. So those are reasons I would support a lower fee for the industrial arts area, but let's engage with them. And if they would want more services instead, I'd be open to that. But let's have those conversations.
Thanks, John. Vice Mayor Rack.
Sorry, I just had one clear point. I wanted just a clarifying question from John and Ron when they talk about the reduced fee, just so I have it clear. Are you talking about only the rent portion, or are you talking about the entire fee? Because that, to me, there's some difference in the two.
I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. I was looking at the fee as a total fee. So we would divide it up however you want to divide it up, 50, 50, 25%, every quarter you pay it. Whatever it is, I do agree. It needs to be clear and understandable and not confusing. So, and I'm fine with that, but I'm not sure it'd be too difficult to figure out some sort of staged implementation of it. So I'd be interested in John's thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I had the same thought that I was talking about the total fee. I mean, the rent component is $44 a month. So I wouldn't want to just say half of that, but you bring up an interesting thought, Adam. I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe there's no rent in the first year, but then the rent piece gets added in year 2 and beyond. And that preserves the notion that we can and, probably ought to charge rent for the use of public parking spaces.
So I think I'd be more in support of that sort of phase in than a different kind of let's do half, because I think our costs are still ongoing. So if we said the option 2 essentially covers our costs, and that may change and stuff, and the fees may change, and the rent sort of becomes we cover that separately, right? As a next year we look at it or something. That makes more sense to me if we were going to go that direction.
Councilmember Collins.
Yeah, thanks. This is all good discussion, but I think it's incomplete without hearing from Stephen and Jeff and Greg about, their thoughts on whether or not we're not looking at this in the right way or have it the wrong way around or something. So I'd be interested in what they're thinking in terms of splitting the fee, ramping it up, charging it in pieces. What is that like administratively?
I think I'll try to tackle that. Yeah, Councilmember Collins.
Yeah,
I think it's just administratively when the program comes back to you. I mean, it's a choice you'll be able to make. And then from my standpoint, it's what type of document are we going to draft the documents, how that's going to be phased in, if that's the decision you ultimately make. Because tonight's a study session on it. We have to take your input now and develop something for you. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this as being a difficult program to administer. It's a fairly limited number of parklets that we're dealing with in terms of, billing and collection and all that. And as I would assume that, phasing it in or stepping it up and those kinds of things we'd have clear direction from the council. And so we'd be able to communicate that and track it and know what we were doing from day one. So we wouldn't be reacting or changing the program after the fact, which, can be difficult and burdensome and can lead to mistakes. But as long as we know what the plan is up front in terms of the preferences from the council, I'm confident that we can implement it without too much difficulty.
And just to add to the point that I was talking about earlier is, I'd suggest to the council that we build in enough flexibility so that change circumstances can be taken into account, ranging from, the ultimate configuration of downtown based upon the planning to temporary issues that the mayor brought up that we just aren't anticipated that might affect the viability of the program.
Madam Mayor, I'm not going to take a hard line on this. It's just I think it's a good discussion, and if the council wants to move in a different direction, it's fine. It was just trying to figure out how we put this in place so that it has the has a fair impact.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, why don't we put a pin in this because we need to extend the meeting and then we'll come back and wrap up our conversation. So would anyone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'd move to extend the meeting to 11:15.
Okay, so, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off, Ron. Do you want to finish your thought?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
I'm good.
Stephen, do you need us to come to a consensus about the options tonight? Because I feel like we're still kind of wrestling with that. Oh, you're on mute.
Apologize. I think what I've heard is, some of the various options and, some clear direction as far as contacting the industrial arts folks. So that's certainly something we do. I think what I'd like to do is, I believe I have enough information to kind of start kind of the discussion internally. And then maybe what I would do is kind of develop a framework and then perhaps set up a meeting with the subcommittee to actually gain a little bit more direction if in fact I do need a little bit more. Making sure that I'm kind of following the proper council's directions in general. In that way, we could kind of make sure that, and then ultimately kind of prepare the final document to bring back to council.
Does that sound okay to everyone here? Has everyone said what they needed to say? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Madam Mayor, I think if I would just offer this, I think we were leaning more towards number 2 with the idea of revisiting the number 3 option at a later date, but I'm fine with whatever Stephen goes with.
Yeah, that was kind of my understanding too.
Right, and that was my understanding as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. We will now move on to item 10, new business, consideration of adopting a resolution extending the temporary closure of the 700 block of Laurel Street and the temporary removing parking on portions of Laurel Street and San Carlos Avenue for an additional 18 months ending on September 15th, 2023. And this will be with Greg Rubens, our city attorney.
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you, Mayor and City Council. My pleasure to present this item. This is essentially an extension of your existing program. And as you might recall, can you change the slide for me, Crystal? So under the vehicle code, the council has authority to extend the temporary closure based upon vehicle code section 21101E. Under 21101E, the council might recall that the council makes a finding that the temporary closure is necessary for pedestrian safety during the temporary closure. And I think you can still make that finding because we still have the activity level and the concern of the public and the need to protect pedestrians on that 700 block where there's more of a concentration of restaurants. The recommended duration of this extension is 18 months from today. And that's some research that I've done is that's a time frame that is reasonably consistent with a temporary closure because that's all that's is authorized under the vehicle code. I want to add one point here that when I was looking at the resolution that's before you, I want to make sure that the finding I mentioned is included at the second whereas in there. So I'm going to be asking you to modify your resolution to state that the extension that the temporary closure remains necessary to protect pedestrian safety in the area of the closure. Next slide, please. So the other part of the reason that this is before you tonight is when we first enacted the temporary closure in 2020, what we used from CEQA is an exemption based upon the declaration of emergency. And things have changed over time, and to the point where the governor potentially could end the declaration of emergency and not give us much time to adjust to that. So staff proactively with the subcommittee undertook the CEQA analysis to evaluate the continuing temporary closure. And so we hired a consultant who did a complete analysis of traffic, parking, signage, other issues that we identified. And the class 1 exemption of an existing facility is an exemption that we think we can use for the continuing temporary closure. And the analysis also concluded that there were no exceptions that might apply to the temporary closure under the complex CEQA guidelines, and the exemption being utilized under 15.300.2. Next slide, please. So what the process with CEQA is, there's a certificate of exemption that the staff, city staff fills out. We've included a reference to that in the resolution you're approving tonight. And so that will be filed, and that'll become the public record. This way, one of our goals here is so that we have an independent CEQA justification for the temporary closure that we've analyzed it and applied to CEQA using a non-emergency CEQA exemption. Next slide, please. And so now I'm turning it over to Stephen or one of his staff to describe for the public and for the council the temporary closure, just so it's clear on the record.
Thank you, Greg. So, as probably council, fully aware, the 700 block of Laurel has been closed for the past 2 years. And so what we're proposing to do is kind of maintain at least this one block to be closed. So what's kind of described before you is just kind of you're kind of showing this is the closure. So we'll still maintain Cherry Street as open, as well as Olive. And it's just that portion between Cherry and Olive will remain closed. Next slide, please. So just more of an aerial view of, specifically how we actually currently have laid out. So kind of working from left to right. So that's Olive Avenue or Olive. So as you kind of work, go northerly, we have Union Bank to the kind of the northeast corner of the intersection. So we have kind of an area that, because they do have a driveway out, we actually need to provide some type of access or exit to allow their customers out to Laurel and then ultimately to Olive. So we actually have it barricaded off using the water barriers. And then the Bank of America driveway off of Laurel that actually currently is closed off, as well as the one little driveway. I believe that is right adjacent to the Hallmark store. And then obviously the barricade closure on Cherry Street right near Giddams. And so that's kind of what we're still proposing, and we still maintain the street closure as such. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll take any questions that council may have.
And that's an important distinction. The prior closures covered both the 600 block and the 700 block, but we're asking the council just to extend for the 700 block because there's no plans to close the 600 block now until we approve a complete comprehensive plan and see what that looks like.
Okay, thank you, Stephen and Greg. I see Vice Mayor Ruck has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Stephen and Greg. I just had one clarifying question. So I understand the closure aspect of it. And then I think, as I understand it as well with CEQA, it is also allowing us to extend the removal of parking in other parts, right, on the 600 block and on San Carlos Avenue for that same period. We wouldn't need to go do and extend the temporary parklet program necessarily separate from this. Is that correct?
That's correct. This covers both programs, the closure. Yeah, I was focusing on the vehicle code, talking about the closure of the street, but you're correct. The resolution would extend the program, parklet program as well.
Great. Thank you. That's all I had, Madam Mayor.
I appreciate that clarification. Any other questions? Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. So the feedback that I continue to get with respect to the street closure from the community is there's a great deal of support for that. And again, COVID continues to evolve. And most recently in December, right, we had Omicron and that type of thing. What I'm wondering about is with respect to this particular item on tonight's agenda, were the non-restaurant businesses contacted in advance to inform them that council was going to be discussing the extension of this for an existing year in a similar way that was done for the parklet fee discussion with the restaurant owners? So what kind of outreach and discussion was held with the retailers and service providers in advance of tonight's meeting?
I don't know if that's a Stephen question or a Jeff question, but I was not involved in that part of it, if there was any outreach that we mentioned. I know that overall the program, the council has been giving the staff direction to, with this downtown plan being developed, that we didn't want to, that we're going to continue on this present track during that time. But obviously that could be changed because we have to extend it. But that was my understanding of where we went.
So
go ahead, Stephen.
So, if I may just kind of interject, specifically to answer your question, was any outreach done to the retails on the 700 block prior to this meeting? I don't believe in this regard, no, it had not, but I believe, and I may need some assistance from Al, but I believe planning may actually did some outreach in regards to the program here. This might be some time back, but they did do the outreach in regards to the street closure. But I don't have the specific dates on that. So Al may be able to shed some light on that.
Yes, Matt, through the mayor, I can shed a little light. Between May 20th of 2020 and December of this year, there was about a dozen different touch points with downtown retail businesses and restaurants. And of those 12 touch points, I would say that about half were to all the businesses in the downtown and half were focused only on restaurants. And so over the last year or so, we have been very active in terms of our, talking to people, letting them know, there were several surveys within those dozen touch points as well. So there's been a great deal of communication with regard to the program overall over this period.
Okay, and was it specific to the idea that the street closure would continue, past the planned September 1st, 2022 date? Was that expectation set during those conversations?
There's been questions about it. I think we've asked questions. What are your feelings about it? How do you, what's your reaction to extension and things like that? So I think that's the way we approached it in the surveys and things like that we did, but not specifically for this evening's extension.
Okay, and then were there discussions held to try to understand like what accommodations could be offered to the retailers and service providers who are not benefiting from the parklet and street closure program? in terms of what alternatives may be offered to them, or have there been any changes made to support their business models that rely on adjacent daytime parking?
So,
yeah, go ahead. You want to try that one, Stephen? Or
sure. So, kind of right when kind of the program initially started, you know, certainly my staff actually did some reach out to a lot of the retailers who were really not interested in actually participating in the Parklet program. However, they did have some needs as far as wanting like adjacent parking close to their storefront. And so I know, you know, we've attempted, and again, this is not just recently, but this was when the program was, you know, we actually personally walked and met with, you know, several local businesses, of which, you know, would include like Bow Wow Meow, UPS store, I think the shoe store, you know, in that regard, in fact, you know, we did add kind of 11 new short-term parking stalls kind of in Harrington Park along, you know, various locations on the 600 block. And these are like the 10 and 20-minute parking stalls. So we tried to accommodate them where we could. Unfortunately, it's not something that we could actually dedicate parking spots to their stores specifically. But we did, you know, try to accommodate them where we could to provide these short-term parking stalls. We actually added 12 new handicap parking stalls within our city surface lots. You know, continue to do kind of like the street and sidewalk cleaning, added the composting bins. You know, and certainly I believe kind of just the return of the farmers market actually helped, you know, will help some of the peds kind of walking in downtown. Additionally, we added some additional parking in the Samtrans garage as well as the Caltrain lot across the way. So, you know, all in attempts to actually provide a little bit more parking. Unfortunately, it's not dedicated specifically to a particular retailer, but it is available to anybody who wishes to use it from the public. And then very early on, I know we had kind of a shop, you know, shop local San Carlos campaign where flyers were mailed out. I know various promotions were done via our social media newsletter and specific postcards. And then we were also part of the local SMC where there was a reward app where people who actually, in partnership with the county and the chamber, where residents could leave their credit card, and then once they purchase something locally, they could redeem their points from the businesses. And then I think lastly, we actually added some additional, currently the temporary directional signs for shoppers to the local business, of which, you know, these will ultimately be replaced with a permanent permanent directors of the wayfinding program.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Stephen, for the rundown of all of those program ads. I appreciate it. And just one last question. So, Greg, from a timing perspective, is this is there what we always call a shot clock on this? I always feel like we're in a hockey game when we ask that question, but is there a shot clock on this particular decision?
The shot clock, if there is one, is sort of unknown because we don't know when the governor might potentially lift his state of emergency, and our state of emergency is tied to his. So, you know, if the governor is, and, you know, no offense to the governor, but the latest announcements that he's has made the change, mask mandates and other things have come via tweet. There's not much notice for them. And so I do have a concern that there may be a very short runway if he decides to lift the declaration of emergency from where we can react and bring this back to you. That doesn't mean that the extension, which was primarily dictated by my recommendation about the temporary nature of it, so it doesn't have to be, the date doesn't have to be changed. I just would like the council to, you know, if it's the will of the council to keep it at September of 22 and revisit the extension at a later time, you could do that. But I'd like you to fill in a different date for the extension and still adopt the resolution tonight because of that emergency declaration aspect.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues before we open public comment? Okay, seeing none. Crystal, can we move to public comments? We will now take public comments on this item only, the temporary Laurel Street closure. You may raise your hand by Zoom now or call in. Crystal, is anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, we do have two hands up at the moment. First up is Tom McDonald. You should be able to unmute. There you go.
Hi, thank you, Madam Mayor and the balance of the council for opening up to public comment. I'm a 28-year resident of San Carlos, and I'm in favor of opening the street back up. It seems that we've had a nearly 2-year test case of how this has worked. The parklets have been fantastic for the restaurants. The closing of the street has been not great for the balance of the folks on the street. We've talked about compromises earlier tonight on all sorts of other issues. I think there's a compromise to be had here with an opening of the street, the keeping of the parklets, or some sort of opening the street during the daytime when those shops are open, not the non-restaurant shops are open and doing business. Keeping foot traffic there at nighttime is just fine. But there's a lot of businesses on that street that have been hammered for the better part of 2 years, and to extend that another 18 months would be not great. I appreciate Mr. Mashida's efforts to create alternative parking and signage, but there's no substitute for foot traffic on the street and being able to park in front of a shop. So as a long-term resident, I'm in favor of opening it back up until we have a firm plan in place, one way or the other. They've gone through 22 months of a difficult pandemic, and to shut this down for another 18 months, I think would be a disservice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Next up is Sonia Elks. You should be able to unmute. Sonia, are you able to unmute?
A related comment, I have very much enjoyed the downtown closure, and I know many people have. I am often disappointed in the lack of traffic downtown, foot traffic, and the fact that bicycles were banned from Laurel Street. I think that was a tremendous disservice to drawing people to the shops and to the businesses. My main comment tonight was to ask to see if, I'd like the whole downtown to be more bicycle and micromobility transit accessible. In light of Tom's comment previously, just before mine, we do need to drive traffic, downtown, and it doesn't have to be in vehicles, but it needs to be. There need to be better bike and pedestrian friendly ways to get to downtown. They're still not clear. And what I'd ask if you could consider is making Cherry Street, especially now that San Carlos Ave is not going to be a quick build accessible route, making Cherry Street the primary way that micromobility and cyclists would be recommended to come into downtown, and have a parking space, bike parking right across from Diddums where the current handicaps, so that there's several parking spaces that are not being used. I would like to see bicycle parking there within that 700 block. It's a hard place to ask a 3rd and 4th or 5th, 6th graders to bike downtown, currently on Olive, and navigate that park in front of the bank, that one-way street in front of the bank. So anyway, I'd like to see more bike ability, micromobility access to downtown, and possibly even half the street for pedestrians, half the street for bicyclists, just until we drive more traffic to our downtown businesses. It doesn't have to be permanent, but we need more movement to draw folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And there are no further hands.
Okay, I'd like to thank the public callers for staying up late with us and calling in tonight. We'll now open it up to council discussion. So who would like to lead us off at this point? Vice Mayor Rack.
Waited, hoping somebody else is going to go first. But Stephen, thanks for the presentation. Greg, I appreciate this, and I appreciate that we've done the work around the CEQA aspect of this. I think that's helpful and allows us to align what we're doing with the downtown plan to, what I don't think it's. I understand the challenges for certain businesses downtown, and I do think we should continue to try to look at ways to, improve access, but. I think sort of potentially going back and forth over a short time period, given that we've got this downtown plan, I don't think we should be making big changes right now. I think we should keep the status quo. I think it's working right now with the downtown. And so I'll be supporting this extension till September of 2023.
We'll go to Councilmember Dugan and then Councilmember Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'll just say I agree with Adam that going back and forth, changing and opening and closing would be disruptive. And, we're moving into our downtown specific planning process, and there'll be a lot of robust community engagement and discussion, and really digging deep on all the issues down there. So I support staying the course and maintaining what we have, and I'm glad we have a firm legal footing to do that on. So I support this extension.
Thanks, John. We'll move on to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I realize things haven't really changed very much. The businesses that were in favor of reopening the street before are still in favor of reopening the street. The people that were for it and against it before, I'm not sure there's been much movement there. I haven't heard from too many people. Although I still continue to believe that we should have been looking at some sort of a hybrid model all along, because these businesses never signed up for this for a year, let alone now what looks like 3 years. So I know we're looking at a long-term plan, but that thing's going to take a couple of years to be completed and then to be implemented. So I'm not going to vote in favor of it, but I understand the desire to continue it. And I know that my vote isn't going to, it's not going to change anything. But I do believe that we should have been looking at some sort of a compromise all along. So that's really all I wanted to say about it.
Thank you, Ron. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. COVID we keep talking about how the fact that it's turned out in a way that I think none of us ever expected. And, this last variant was very, problematic, and it was swift. It moved through the community really quickly. I spoke to a CEO of Sutter Health recently, and he shared with me that he doesn't really know what is going to come in future, in the fall, for example, like when we might expect this. And so, the jury's still out, so to speak. I concur with Councilmember Collins that I feel like we could do more to try to figure out how to integrate the needs of our non-restaurant businesses into the discussion. And I appreciate the long list of things that Stephen Machida went through with us tonight. But I'm still hearing some of those businesses are having a hard time. You know, I would just ask that as we move forward, we continue to actively engage all of the stakeholders in the downtown core, actively listen and try to be creative about how we make San Carlos, easy to do business in. We heard from our community members that they want a variety of restaurants and different types of businesses downtown. So that's something that we're being called upon to do. I'm conflicted because of the overwhelming community support to keep that street closed, but I'm also very empathetic towards our retailers and our service providers who continue to suffer, and I'm struggling. So I'm still making my mind up on this one.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. I agree. This has been no one signed up for any of this in the pandemic. I mean, I think that it has been, as I started the meeting tonight, it's been a really hard 2 years in many different ways. And, I think we have all spent a lot of time downtown supporting our retailers, talking to our retailers. I just walked downtown with the chamber a few weeks ago to reach out personally and listen to feedback. And I was happy to hear that some retailers are seeing their sales rebound. Not all, but we heard tonight about the data of how much online shopping has truly become so popular in our community. There are larger market forces in effect that are affecting our retailers as well, which is why it's been so important to us to, do the Shop Local campaign. I will note that the retail businesses that I spoke with did not seem to be super aware of the employee parking. So I would like to see us redouble our efforts to really reach out to our businesses, to encourage employees to park on the second floor of Wheeler Plaza. I park up there every time I go downtown, and the employee parking is completely empty. And so I do think that once again, we're all in this together, and we all need to encourage employees downtown to please try to park in that second story or over in the Samtrans building to free up the parking downtown for customers. So I do think that there is some improvement that we can do there. I also appreciated Sonia Elks's comment tonight about the bike parking. I would like to see some more bike infrastructure down there in areas where it is easy for young people or families to access ways to park their bikes. And I agree that I don't foresee, I worked at the farmer's market a couple of weeks ago in the city booth, and the vast majority of people that came up to the booth said, please keep the downtown the way it is. We really like it. Tonight in the survey, we heard that one of the things people like best now is the downtown. It's the first time that theme cracked the top 5, and I believe it was number 3. So we have heard just an overwhelming amount of support for keeping this change in place. And I think that's probably the most prudent thing to do while we do our holistic downtown plan. So I too am going to vote in favor of this tonight. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt resolution 2022-29, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos extending the temporary closure of the 700 block of Laurel Street and temporarily removing parking on portions of Laurel Street and San Carlos Avenue for an additional 18 months, ending on September 15, 2023. And Greg, is this where you said you had some other items we need to add?
Yeah, I'd like to be able to add to the resolution that the temporary closure remains necessary for pedestrian safety in the area of the closure.
And that the temporary closure remains necessary for pedestrian safety in the area of the closure.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan.
Yeah, so I think, so I appreciate, Madam Mayor, your comments. And I made those observations as well in our characteristic survey. And I, again, too, you know, here, I still know that many community members, our young ones, still don't have access to a vaccine, and that's an issue. So I will reluctantly be voting yes on this tonight. I think it's the right thing to do for, I think, many of the reasons that were articulated by my colleagues during this discussion. I would like to, you know, second some of Mayor McDowell's suggestions about how we continue to engage our stakeholders in the downtown corridor to try to continue to make improvements to drive foot traffic and make business, help support our non-restaurant businesses. They are an important part of our community. And again, it's something our community members are looking for, that variety. So what we can do to sustain, help sustain them in a way, in a manner that helps move them forward during these difficult times, I would be appreciative of. So thank you.
Okay, seeing no further hands raised, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Collins.
No.
And Mayor McDowell.
Yes. Okay, now we will move on to item 10B. Does anyone think we need to extend the meeting a second time, or do we want to try and push through to 11:15?
Let's go for it.
Okay, we're going to try and push through, Niall. Okay, consideration of adopting a resolution adopting the City of San Carlos 2022 strategic plan. Take it away, Niall. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. This is the final item under new business this evening, the 2022 strategic plan for your review and consideration. I do have this presentation. It's about 8 slides and I could go through it quickly. Everything is in the staff report as well as all the supporting documents. If you'd like, I can forego this and we can jump right into questions if you have any. I'm going to give you that option and leave it to you.
What is the will of the council?
Madam Mayor, I don't.
I'm sorry, Ron, I didn't hear you.
I said I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay. And Madam Mayor, I support that as well. We've spent a lot of time on these goals and we're all pretty familiar with them, I believe.
Okay. Niall, I'm wondering, do you want to put up slide 7 just so we can look at it and we'll move on to questions?
Okay, slide 7.
Oops,
sorry.
How about that? Right. That will remind us what all of the goals are. 2 new ones. Okay, any questions for Niall? I had a quick question actually, but I think it's for Stephen. Okay. But Niall, you can take a crack at it too. Sure. During our I just wanted to check on something that I raised during our strategic plan retreat, and that was looking into reducing speed limits near K-12 schools to 15 miles per hour. And I know that Councilmember Palmer Lohan, always mayor in my mind, she chimed in as well that she would be interested in that. So I'm wondering if that's part of our work plan for this year. And I see Stephen here.
It is. Sorry, it is, Madam Mayor. It is something that we want to work. I definitely want to kind of contact with the school superintendent and and probably roll out at the start of the next school year. Just so again to allow us the opportunity to kind of order all the materials and do kind of our public outreach, kind of let people know about the changing of the speed limits.
I'm sorry. So are you planning on studying that, or you're planning on just proceeding with rolling it out next school year?
Yeah, it would be rolling it out next year. So, probably we would probably want to implement or start changing out the signs, speed limit signs, probably during the summer in preparation for the new school year.
Okay, that's wonderful news. I appreciate that. Stephen, would you be able to maybe put a blurb in our city council newsletter at some point, just with kind of the details about how, like, kind of the radius around the schools and just how that might play out? I'm just looking for a little more information.
I'd be happy to do that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. This is great news. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I guess we're tired. Let's see. So I see no questions. Crystal, would you like to open the public comments? So this is taking comments on the strategic plan update. Is there anyone left in the waiting room?
There are no hands for this item.
Okay. Any further council discussion on this item? Okay, well, I wanted to say thank you to staff for I really love our strategic plan and looking at the work plan and all of the tasks to be completed. I think it's a really valuable document for all of us to kind of understand the timing of how things come through the city and get worked on. And I would encourage the public to take a look because it is a really great view into how the city gets work done. Councilmember Dugan, did you have a comment?
Madam Mayor, I was going to make a similar type comment, but just to say I'm very enthusiastic about our two new goals. I think our Northeast area specific plan, there's a lot of good, interesting work I think we'll all be excited to engage in the coming years. I like the new name of that. Harbor Industrial was a little awkward. I had more than one person ask me, we have a harbor? A little hard to explain that. So I like the Northeast area. And senior services and programming. I think there's just a lot we can do around that. It was interesting reading that work plan. And I think this just sets us up well. And my one comment would just be, I would, personally, I would like, when we engage on different issues through the year, this really, I think of this really as my touchstone as I'm trying to navigate things. And I just throw it out, Jeff, staff, the more we could orient staff reports, even on specific items, to how they really feed in and achieve the goals as we're wrestling with them. I would almost love to see a section in every staff report that directly ties whatever we're thinking about or doing right back into these goals. And I know a lot of that's implicit in the work, but I just, I think everything's clearer in my mind the more specifically we're touching back to what we've dedicated ourselves towards.
Thanks, John. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Niall. Thanks for being here. And thanks to staff for all of the work putting the work plan together. I know it's a lot of work. Okay,
did we get a motion for this item?
Oh, sorry.
I move to adopt it. I move to adopt resolution 2022-30. A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the City of San Carlos 2022 strategic plan.
Second.
Could you please call the roll, Crystal?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we will move on to item 11, agenda setting. Any issues that anyone would like to bring up tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will adjourn. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay well.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good evening.